I mean, that is essentially. I mean, that makes slightly more sense, I suppose. I mean, the only thing I know about Will's box stream is that people were laughing at it earlier. That's all I've got. That's all I've heard.
Yeah, I wanted to pop in there with like that funny bit of real piece of information about Schrodinger, because most people probably don't know that. But said I'm a nerd, so I knew that. I thought
That
it would
is
just be funny to address on his stream about the box.
that's fine.
Maybe it
So,
wasn't in good taste, but I thought it was funny.
well, look. If your explanation to me is Will tried to hold an ARG type stream about what's in the box, and you came on and derailed it totally by pointing out that his premise to do with the box might be slightly, pedophilic. That's actually pretty funny.
Well,
that's unironically pretty funny.
so here's the thing. I promise you this. I didn't derail it. Every time I tried to get us back on the subject that Will asked us a question about, it just got derailed, sort of naturally. I tried to like come up with other analogies that was like the same as what he was talking about, and it just nothing could really stick. I tried.
I mean, it sounds like a fucking. I blame f bombs. What did f bombs do?
F bombs. F bombs. There was some points where he was like pretty on the head, but he was talking a lot about like his. I guess it was just like a lot about his own like personal philosophies and shit about like privacy and like police and stuff. Oh man, this is so bad. But I thought it was funny, and I knew it was gonna be a fun one, but I just didn't know it was gonna be like that. Bear with me here. That should help. I think just because it was daytime when I started, and now I have to reconfigure this stupid stuff.
Yeah, you're fine. Take your time. Take your time. This is a very chilled stream. People are coming over here to like detox from Katie, apparently. So, Katie from the Wick stream.
I like Katie.
I like Katie.
Really, really good conversation on our first one.
I moderated Katie last night. Thank you very much for being good about that. By the way, I appreciate that.
I have had to reschedule things with people so many times for like weird shit. Like I just had to reschedule reservoirs because I forgot that I had to go to court. Everything's fine. It's just like a misunderstanding kind of thing. But I was just there for way longer than I expected to be, and I had to get some sleep. It was like a fix-it ticket kind of thing, but there was like a lot of people ahead of me, and it was silly. There wasn't even anything wrong with my vehicle. I got a fix-it ticket, did nothing, and got it resolved without doing anything to my vehicle.
Fair. Okay.
So if people have stuff come up, I get that 100%. Now, if you were like, let's reschedule it, and then you like fucked off, right? I'd be like, this motherfucker.
Oh, just quickly, thank you for the gifted sub to Lux, and thank you for the follow. Braindead for the sub, and Enkife for the follow. That's such a fucking cool name. Right, okay. Sorry. Like, I'm very tired, guys, so my brain's gonna be a little bit all over the fucking place. Which is fine. You won't even notice a fucking difference. So yeah. Well, look. Fuck. Okay, well, I'm glad Will's done his box stream. I hope he had fun. Okay, so religion. Let's talk about religion. What do you want to talk about? Where do you want to start? Because I know you've wanted to have a conversation about religion for a while, so I'll let you sort of set up the framing. What's in the box? Right, go on.
So I guess I'll just start off. Like your credentials outweigh mine heavily. I just want to say that like since I was 13, I've been like super interested to it. Like big time. I went really hard into religion when everybody else played video games. And I still play video games, but that's not what I want to talk about with people. I want to talk about religion. Never really had an opportunity to. So I was like a 14-year-old who would talk to like priests about religion and like get frustrated because like they wouldn't acknowledge like some of the contradictory things they said and stuff. And I'm just trying to understand stuff. So I kind of emulated like an angry atheist when I wasn't necessarily an atheist, just because religious people I knew weren't consistent or like honest. And I actually kind of wanted to go to school for theology, But when I looked up like what kind of jobs there were in the field, they were basically non-existent unless I wanted to be a priest, and I didn't. I did not want to be a priest, so I didn't go to school for religion. In fact, there's a I used to play Go. Like that was the main thing I played on the computer was Go, and my name was theologist on there. Like that's how hardcore into just studying religion I was as a teenager and a young adult.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to be a priest as a kid.
Oh
You
wow.
know, when I was like, I wanted to be a priest when I was like 9. I don't know what that says about me as a person. Um, but yeah, then I kind of stopped. Hey, Ginger. Then I kind of stopped. Give me 1 second. I just need to do something quickly.
No worries.
Ginger. I really can't spell today. There we go. Yeah, and then I left the faith, I guess, after my confirmation.
Okay, Catholic. Sure.
Yeah, because I was like, it just wasn't making total sense to me.
Yeah.
Priest, don't you mean vicar? No, well, I mean father, I guess. I wanted to be a bishop in the long term.
So one of the things that I don't understand super well is like the church hierarchy, because I care way more about the religion than like the structures.
Sure.
Like when I've talked to like a lot of if you knock on my door to talk to me about God, I let you in, and I don't want to talk, but I'm like, okay, I don't want to talk about your book. I don't care if you're a Mormon, who you are. Talk to me about God then. I want to hear your ideas about God, not about your religion. Um, so I kind of tried to like keep away from the institutions and look more at like the actual theology, because I think the institutions are a great way to not get a good understanding of the actual like religion.
Yeah, I mean it's
Dogma ruins everything.
well, it depends on the dogma. But yeah, I think Catholicism generally is a bit of a complicated religion in some respects, because it, over time, with like well over 1,000 years, has turned into much more of a political maneuver than just a religious institution. But I mean, we can get into structure and things generally. What like just sort of focus in so we've got sort of a starting point.
Sure.
Um, what particularly like where do you want this conversation to go?
I guess I'm just sort of taking advantage of the relationship that we have to see the stuff that you know, to try to learn some
Sure.
stuff from you and kind of maybe just like nerd out about some things
Yeah, sure.
about religion, because this is an extraordinarily rare opportunity for me. Most of my life I got in trouble for talking about religion. It was never like it was never been like, hey, you want to talk about religion? Yeah, and then could. That was just not a thing. Um, so how? So I guess I plan on just like asking you some questions and kind of just letting
Sure.
it flow from there. Uh,
Sure.
so can you explain to me your degree?
So my bachelor's degree is theology and ethics. So it is not like a pure Catholic degree or anything like that. It's not pure Christian. It's comparative religion, but not like religious studies. It's just full-on theology of multiple religions and also studying kind of the ethics and beliefs behind those.
Mm-hmm.
I specialized in my dissertation in the progress of demonology from kind of the work St. Augustine did around the fall of Rome with the city of God against the pagans, and basically how he took the pagan gods and used classical Greek theology arguments and also kind of legal arguments to argue that the position that the pagan gods held, because there's a hierarchical system within sort of mysticism, which is you've got mortals, you have ethereal beings, and then you have gods. And ethereal beings are beings that are mortal and non-physical, and then you've got sort of gods. And the argument within paganism, in the way they, you know, coming from paganism, there was an argument that ethereal beings were sort of higher than mortals. And Augustine's argument was, well, no, they're not, because even though they're immortal and ethereal, humans in particular have a unique relationship with God, and that puts us higher. And actually, our mortality is kind of a benefit, if anything. So the argument as well, like there's arguments in City of God of Pagans. So, for example, well, the pagan gods create miracles, and Augustine's like, yes, there's an acknowledgement that the pagan gods do create miracles, but those miracles are on par with the miracles of like a martyr or a saint, or humans that conduct miracles using a fraction of God's power. So Augustine's argument is quite literally, well, if Christian martyrs and saints can create miracles on par with the pagan gods using a fraction of God's power, God must be more powerful than the pagan gods doing it directly, because they're using all their strength to do that. And then basically how... Well, I mean, it's a... It makes sense within kind of the context of the arguments that were happening at the time, but then the argument was like, you know, these are actually demons. Essentially, they're the reason Rome fell. We need to deal with them, etc., etc. And then how that sort of led into, because there's a reason why, for example, like demons within Christianity look a lot like the pagan gods did. And that kind of carries through to stuff like, for example, you know, the idea that like if you're really rich, it's because you serve Satan, like that kind of Christian. So there's a reason that argument exists, and it's not just like Satan rewards you; it's specifically to do with Hades. Most people look at Hades and go, "God of the Dead." Wasn't just God of the Dead, also God of Wealth. Yeah. But because Hades gets equated to Satan, it's, well, if you're wealthy, then you're directly being helped by Satan, because that's where that connection comes from.
Funny. I didn't know that, but I know that's why you had to pay the ferryman.
Yeah, you've got loads of little things like that within kind of like demonology and Christianity, and then I kind of worked on things like the Lesser Key of Solomon, which really? So looking at kind of like lists of demons and things, because I've always found occultism really interesting. Somebody asked, did I do like any Orientalism? Bits and bobs. So I've studied Shintoism. I've studied an awful lot of Taoism. Bits of Buddhism. I really like Taoism. The Tao Te Ching really is nice. Yeah, it's awesome religion.
It's kind of a breath of fresh air comparatively to other religions. At least when I first got into it, I was like, oh, this is just nice. This is I guess it's a lot easier to connect with Taoism than it is probably any. Like, you don't have to believe in like a whole lot of crazy shit, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, so the way to look at it is this, and this is the mistake a lot of Western people make when they look at things like Buddhism, for example, is the reason you get so many insufferable Western Buddhists is they look at Buddhism and they go, well, Buddhism is a religion of peace. It's so peaceful. Unlike that Christianity religion. That Christianity religion's got so much violence in it and killing and Buddhism has just as much of a history of this. The thing is, yeah, they're like religions are human things. Like, and when you just look at the base text, you're like, oh, this looks fine. And this is, you know, if you go to China and you talk to Chinese Christians, they're not going to be like, Christianity is like a violent, oppressive religion. They're going to be like, it's great, because they kind of end up looking at Christianity in the same way we look at Buddhism. It's just this foreign religion that's not sort of integrated into
cultural dogma.
Yeah, pretty much. And like Taoism's...
I mind.
Yeah, no, I mean
American
like
Christians who have the cultural dogma ingrained into their belief.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult when you look at things like Taoism as well, because you're like, well, this is a really simple religion. But when you're looking at things in Taoism, things like really simple statements, like the value of a pot is in its emptiness, which is basically the argument that if you had a pot that's made of solid gold, it's shit at being a pot.
Yeah.
Solid gold, that's great, but it's not a good pot. It's very much an argument of control. So a lot of Taoism is like, well, you seem really sad that you're not rich and wealthy. It's like, well, do you want to be rich and wealthy? That's a lot of stress you'd have to deal with. And stuff like that can be, uncomfortable, especially in modern terms, because it just looks like a religion kind of excusing oppression. But yeah, the Tao Te Ching's awesome. I mean, just beautiful, beautiful poetry.
Yeah, I think like right before this started, I looked it up again because I wasn't sure. I was talking to my wife about doing this stream, and I had brought up Shintoism. She had never heard of it. I was like, oh, really? That's the largest wooden building in the world is an old Shinto shrine. And then I fact checked myself to see if I'm losing it or not. And it is. It's still standing today. Um, I think that why do you think that so it's not just that people don't have a good understanding of Eastern religions, it's just that mentions of them are not just scarce, but when they are brought up in Western society, they are full of like a bunch of bullshit that doesn't belong there to begin with. What do you think the deal is with that?
Sorry, say that again.
So, you mentioned that Eastern religions
Mm.
aren't very well understood by the West, but not only are they, but I think they're not only like scarce and mentioned, but when they are, there's a bunch of like added unnecessary bullshit that doesn't really have anything to do with it. I don't. What do you think that's about?
Um, what's a good way to put this? Part of the problem with kind of any other religion, like that's outside your cultural norm, is inherently religions aren't just things we can kind of pick up and go, okay, cool. This is like the core belief structure. This is how all the followers are going to behave, etc., etc. When you look at like Buddhism, for example,
Sure.
like you look at the base text of Buddhism and you go, well, that's really peaceful and really normal and very, very pacifist. So how do you have a religion like Buddhism in connection with like Japan and the samurai, for example? Because the samurai are warrior code and ethics. And that's why you end up with things like Zen Buddhism, because there's very particular cultural reasons that you take a religion like Buddhism and you go, here's the qualifiers for why you're able to go and murder people. And exactly the same thing happened in Christianity. You had things like just war theory, which was just like, for hundreds of years, there's no way that Christians can join the military. Christians were getting thrown to lions and shit and being like, yeah, this is, turn the other cheek because it's a core tenet of the religion. And then Augustine's like, no, there are situations where you're able to go to war. There's situations where you're able to fight. And then this is further reinforced by Aquinas. So it's things get missed because religions aren't just a singular thing in history that happen and never change.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this like phrase. I really like this thing from Laserpig, which is like, war never changes. It's like, well, yes, it does. Sometimes war changes during the same war multiple times. And religions like that. This whole idea, Christianity's not changed in thousands of years. Yes, it has. It's changed so much. Yeah.
Even the book changed.
Yeah, I mean, we have revisions. Some things are removed. Like the Book of Enoch's a really good example of this. You'll find like this in Africa, the Book of Enoch is much more considered as part of the canon. The Catholics have, I think it's 7 books that are non-canonical, but are like still considered stuff that you'd read. Or they're canonical, and I can't remember which way around it is for Catholicism. But yeah, absolutely. These things change constantly. And people have this image of religion as timeless. Even like reading the Bible in English, for example, is a comparatively recent change. It's also interesting. It's one of the reasons that Christianity has so many problems. So things like Islam, for example, are religions that are very much designed that your followers should read the Quran.
And also in Arabic too.
Yeah, but the point is, you should read the Quran. Christianity is not like that. The Bible is built as a guidebook to be guided by a priest who is educated and can impart to you the correct lessons. When you convert it into English and go, well, anyone can read the Bible, it's like, okay, but that's not what the Bible was actually written in a style to convey. and that's one of the reasons that we end up with so many weird interpretations. But yeah, Druidism was destroyed by white girls who made up stuff. I mean, fucking Druidism was destroyed by multiple people. But yeah, sure, there's like fucking again, paganism is. A lot of people look at paganism and go, paganism is an ancient religion practiced by our forebears. It's like, no, most pagan beliefs are stuff that was like invented in the 60s. Because we know basically nothing.
Can we just say like define that paganism?
Define paganism.
Non-Christianity.
Well, so okay, so when I say
there's a bit of a dual meaning that gets used, but definitionally,
sure.
It's the Christian word for infidel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's when because I can see what you mean by that.
There's a colloquial use that means something different. That means like general, like old polytheistic, like nature observing religions with
yeah. I'll separate it out. There is sort of classical paganism, which is we'll separate it into three things just for the purpose of the conversation.
Okay.
We'll say there's classical paganism, which is Roman and Greek religion, and anything that was like established, but that is basically just Roman and Greek religion for the purposes of this conversation, unless we want to get really fucking in depth. You have neo-paganism, which is generally what pagans are now, including things like Wiccans. Stuff like that. You got a general thing, and then you've got pagan, as in in the way that we refer to tribal European religion. So stuff like, and you can have pagan religion alongside classical pagan religion in that respect, because so for instance, you're familiar with like Pan, or like Pan's a really interesting one because like you had Athens with a very formalized religion. But most people around that area were, like in the rural areas, worshipped Pan. So he was very much sort of an agricultural, much simpler god in those respects. Though his origins are like fucking ancient. He's like tied with Dionysus and stuff. It's very odd. But yeah, okay. I'll try and keep that clear, and I'll say classical pagan when I mean classical pagan.
Yeah, sorry. I just think it's important for me to understand where you're coming from.
It's fine. I can go off on random fucking tangents in conversations like these, and I will constantly. But imagine letting the poor illiterate read the words of God. Look, there's a great like moment in history. It's one of my favorite. They converted the Bible into English, and they had to read it. And there's a story of you got a lot of stories of like preachers holding their congregations at sword point. But one preacher literally stood there with pistols at one point, reading the Bible to his congregation, who were just ready to fucking riot because people weren't happy. They viewed it as changing the words of God, which makes sense. But yeah,
I think that the only way the Bible works, the way that like a modern Christian thinks that the Bible, like if the Bible's the word of God, like the average Christian thinks the Bible's the word of God, I think the only way that it could possibly work is that any Christian could pick it up at any time and get exactly what God's message was to them specifically, right then and there. Otherwise, it couldn't possibly be the word of God. That would be the glory of the Christian God, is that you could mistranslate it, you could spread it all over, you could have all these people fuck with it, but every time one of my followers has it in their hands and they seek me, they will not just find me, but they will find my message to them when they needed it, and they will understand exactly what I meant if they are truly seeking. Otherwise, because that is probably the closest thing that I can imagine to the glory of the Christian God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear that argument. God should have been smarter, cut down that.
I'm sure someone said this before me, but that's like my own theory about it.
I think part of the problem is, it will be the theological response. So there's a viewpoint. This can sound like a pivot, but and if you feel like I'm not answering the question, pull me back. But there's a viewpoint that God should give evidence and proof to humans to believe in him.
Oh.
Like really, really clear. Like it should be like well, if God's there, I should be able to know God. But from the theological side, God has already proved through Christ, at least within Catholicism, Christianity generally, that he exists. He has already done miracles and saved it. We're kind of in the holding stage after Christ. God doesn't need to really do much else most of the time because he's already done the great action. We've already had basically the truth revealed to us. It's then up to us to sort of go, yep, that's truth. Which can be challenging, I suppose.
Well, it also
Does that
proof would remove faith from the equation too. You can't have faith and know. Faith means you believe without knowing, and so if there was evidence of God, if there was evidence of God's existence,
faith isn't blind. Faith isn't blind within Christianity.
No, I think you have to use your internal reasoning to come to the conclusion of the belief. But if there was proof, I don't think that you could have faith anymore. If you know God exists, you're not doing that. You're not giving him the trust that he's asking for in exchange for eternal salvation.
I think that's a pretty modern interpretation, if I'm honest. I think classically speaking,
sure,
God has provided that evidence. Would be kind of the response. It's weird because again, we look at it now and go, well, faith's something difficult, it's challenging. But classically speaking, it really shouldn't be. It should be like, well, gods exist. This is God. God has revealed himself. And he has, especially through Christ, a very personal-ish relationship with us. So, yeah, I don't know if it's as clear-cut as just being like, well, it's blind, because I think that's pretty modern as an interpretation.
I don't think that even if I was Christian, I would never argue for blind faith. But I think that I think agnosticism is the only thing that you can really assert without running into problems. Even if you have faith, you can still admit that you don't know.
Sure.
And so I have a hard time talking to people who can't admit that. Like I had 2 debates with Darth Dawkins, and it was the worst 2 streams I've ever had in my entire life.
Why?
Have you ever heard Darth Dawkins speak?
I've never heard Darth Dawkins speak.
Okay, so he's a Christian presuppositionalist, or he's an apologist, and everything comes down to presupposition, and he runs you down a logic tree. And if you try to point out a fallacy in it, or if you try to if you have to have any explanation for your response to him, he will talk over you. But you're also not allowed to talk over him. The first time was like, I was up for 24 hours. I slept for an hour and got out of bed to talk to him. The next day he interrupted me, and it went a lot better because I wasn't half dead. And now I'm on his list of people he'll never talk to. So it seems I've talked to some of the prolific internet debaters on Christianity, and a lot of them tend to go down this like presuppositional rabbit hole, which is it's just cope for the fact that they want to run you through this logic tree. It's nonsense, which I don't think. I think those kinds of arguments kind of destroy the idea of like what faith-based religions are supposed to be, which would be like kind of like the revelation kind of thing. Like you said that you're religious, yes?
Yeah, I believe in God.
Did you have like a revelation?
I don't know if I'd describe what I had as a revelation. I'd say I have had a series of religious experiences through my life that have led me to the conclusion that God is real.
Interesting. That's the one thing that I won't argue with somebody about. I think that if you've experienced something that you would say is profound and like a religious experience, I think to not trust your own senses is insanity. So I would have to believe that you experienced those.
Yeah, I don't argue from that position. I don't say anyone should believe me because I have had this experience. Because I think that's.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I think it'd be fundamentally ridiculous to do that. As a way to. Firstly, I don't try and convince anyone that God exists. I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters what people believe, so I don't care.
I think that it would be crazy to say that if you experienced the things I experienced, you too would absolutely have the same belief as me.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
that
I
overall
like.
that revelation.
I'd say that. So I've never look. I don't know if I've ever had an experience that I'm like, yeah, that's God. Like I'd give it. Okay, I'll give a recent experience. I was dealing with some random shit, like during the pandemic, and I hadn't seen my mum in months because we're in lockdown. Like actually over a year. It's like a year and a half. And I was locked away in a room, and I was renting a house, but it was kind of like taking care of the house because the landlords lived out of country, and then they came back and stayed in the country during lockdown. So we were all stuck in this fucking house, basically living in one room for like a year and a half. It's fucking ridiculous. And eventually that kind of fell apart. I was like, I need to leave and get out. I was like, what the fuck am I gonna do? We're in the middle of the pandemic, or like the tail end of it. And I was like, right, okay, I have to move home. And it was really rough because like I'm an adult and I've got like a load of shit going on. I've got my job. I don't know how it's going to work. Moved home, and if I hadn't done that, because Mum died like 6 months later, if I hadn't done that, if that terrible shit hadn't happened, which was really unlikely for multiple reasons that it would have played out that way, I wouldn't have even known my mum had died. She just would have stopped answering the phone one day. And there are things like that where I have had experiences with timing in my life, and the way certain things have looked really bad and have turned out to be exactly what I needed. Like a few too many times for me to really be like, okay, well, for me, that feels like an intervention. Thank you, Faye. It's okay. It's fine. But yeah, like I guess I look at those situations and I get a lot of people talk about getting what you want out of God and your relationship and all those things. I don't talk about it in that way. I get what I get what I need, and I needed that. So
I don't know. So I need you to let me know if I push on anything that's uncomfortable. I kind of have a policy of not trying to bait people out of their faith. So I just have a couple questions about that, and if you feel like I'm pushing towards that, let me know and I'll back off. It's really something I'm not comfortable doing anymore. I had that phase in my early 20s. I'm done with that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so, do not stress.
So if that's the kind of experience that you have that leads you to the belief in God, why would this not instead lead you to the belief in, say, something akin to like a guardian angel that's looking out for you, like a lesser ephemeral being?
I think it could do. I don't think I make that many prescriptions about what God has to be.
I like that.
But yeah, like I think it's one of those where I'm happy with the possibility. It's just a word I use. Somebody said define God. I think that's a really hard one. I think we have sort of like the standard understanding of what God's definition is. There's actually like a friend of mine who I lived with who was theoretical physics was like any being that like occupies, I think it's like 17 dimensions, would meet the definition of God.
I think for me, I've asked this question to more religious people than I can count. And for me, I think that in order for something to be God, it would have to be omniscient and omnipresent, nothing else. That's it.
Yeah, I think the omniscience one is interesting, as is omnipresent.
Some people require too.
Well, also a lot of people require omnibenevolent. Like the idea God must be, and I don't really agree with that, if I'm honest. I don't think it matters. I should probably actually attack people. Sorry, get distracted. But yeah, I don't think it matters all that much what God is in respect to kind of goodness, because I don't think our morals. I don't think our morals track. When I describe God as a model railway builder. Model railway builders build these incredibly complicated things that only really make sense to them. And unless you build model railways, you can look at it and go, well, that's really impressive. But mostly you're looking at it and going, well, that's a weird thing for someone to build. Why have you spent your time doing that? And I kind of look at God in the same way. I think it's something you understand if you build model railways. Okay. But unless you're the kind of being that builds model railways, you can't appreciate it.
It's so I guess it makes me think of there's some, I don't know, story or whatever, and it's essentially like a kid saying, I'm gonna put the ocean in this cup, and the guy says you can't put the ocean in the cup, and the kid says neither can you put the idea of God into your mind. It's just too much for one person to consider. You could maybe get like a glass out of the ocean of it. That's what you're saying makes me think of, that the idea is just a bit too large for you to understand, but the things that you can understand, you're satisfied with.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, I think there are complexities to it that we just have to take time. I think we have to accept the limits of our own mortality.
Yeah, I think when it comes to prescriptions about God, I'm a lot more comfortable saying things that I can be confident that God isn't, rather than what God is, if I were to try to define God. Because omniscient, omnipresent, it meets the requirements for like a specific model of God. But I think saying what God can't be can fit a lot more frames of ideas of God.
Yeah.
One of the things that I always think of as really bizarre, like probably my best friend, he was really frustrated with religion because he's tried to reach out to God, like have communication with God, and he couldn't, so that's why he's not religious. And it made me wonder how many people expect to have a relationship with God where they actually hear somebody talking to them. So they're expecting a non-physical being to respond to them in their ear with a English voice, but this being doesn't have a mouth. It doesn't have vocal cords to produce sound. And this is a perception that I think a lot of people have when they hear somebody saying, like, talking to God. But I don't think that could ever be what it ever means in a religious revelation story.
Yeah, there's like, okay, the story I quite like, which is a long-winded way to say this, but I think it's a helpful kind of aid, I guess. There's a flood coming, and they need to evacuate the town. And the local parishioners go to the church and they say, Father, you need to come with us to the flood. And he says, No, my child. God will save me. And then the rains come. And the priest climbs up to the roof. And then a boat comes and they, Father, get in the boat. And he says, No, God will save me. And then waters get higher and he climbs up to the steeple and a helicopter comes and then, Father, get in the fucking helicopter. And they said, No, God will save me. And then he drowns.
Yeah.
And he gets to heaven and goes, You didn't save me. And he said, I sent you people, a boat, and a helicopter. Well, what did you want?
Yeah, 3 times.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of... I think that very much does answer what I'm saying. I just think that people get a very bizarre, personalized view of God. It seemingly out of desire and laziness. Because there's information out there if you want it, but it seems like people don't want the information. They don't want to engage with it. They want their ideas about God to just be what they want it to be. And then they take that idea as truth for granted. It's very weird to me how people interact with religion and God, when it should be perhaps one of the most important questions you ask yourself in your life, and people really write it off. Does that weird you out at all? Or do you even agree?
I sent you a damn boat. I think people desperately want meaning, and a lot of people think, well, this is the point where I need the most help. Why isn't God there?
I hate that.
And there's nothing wrong with having a personal relationship with God. I think that's reasonable from the Christian point of view. Like, you have to have that through Christ, but I
Yeah, I
do think it's
misunderstand what you're
reason.
saying then. I see a lot
Well,
of people lose faith because something bad happened to them and God didn't stop it. And I don't know of any religion where God is supposed to protect you from bad things happening. And this would sort of lead into my the thing that I was saying, where people have this idea of God they sort of made up and they take it for granted as the truth, and then they lose faith in their God because it didn't match their idea that they just sort of made up.
AF bombs.
Does that make sense?
Um, yeah, it does. It's what's a good way to put it?
It's like loss is one of the greatest reasons for people to lose faith. Like my kid died, or I lost my husband. These sorts of things make people lose their faith, and I just have to think you never had it then.
Well, for a lot of people, they think. So I think it's broken down into groups. I think there are people who believe in God because they believe it gives them some sort of special status. They are privy to some knowledge. They maintain faith and therefore get special treatment. And when God fails in that, I think that I think they find that challenging. Um, I think there are people who believe because God is a comfort, and so when that they feel like that comfort has failed them, they're like, well, why did I believe in the first place? It hasn't stopped this terrible thing happening. And I think there are people with a much more. Okay, so there are people, like, again, I'll use an example for this. There is a view within Judaism that God is real, but God shouldn't be worshipped because of the Holocaust. Because God broke the covenant. The Jews hadn't done anything, and this terrible thing happened. So God is the one who needs to make reparations because that's the agreement. It's not the same as Christianity. There is an agreement here. You are my people. You worship me. You do what I fucking say, and you follow the commandments. And you go, okay, cool, but you're gonna take care of us, right? Like we're gonna be like the most powerful. Like, and when you look at like history, it's like David. David should have been like true savior, and then David fucked up. Moses fucked up, and then then they wandered the desert for 40 years. It's a very reciprocal relationship.
Sure.
And I think that's not exactly an unreasonable view in a lot of respects. Because you should get something out of it. Christianity doesn't have the same thing. Because it's not what happens to you in this life that matters, it's the next life.
Right.
And people forget that. They're like, well, God didn't protect me. It's like, well, the argument of why does God let bad things happen? It's not that God lets bad things happen. It's that, again, from the Christian perspective. And like, fuck, Andrew Wilson in the Crucible disagrees with me on this really hard, but he's wrong. So the Christian perspective is this. At least within like all sane denominations. We were in the Garden of Eden and everything was perfect. We fucked up, we got kicked out of the garden, we now live in a fallen state. This world is imperfect. That's why bad things happen. That's why animals go from things that we are like basically the wardens of to things that want to eat us. The world becomes dangerous because we made the choice to make it dangerous. This is the outcome. So yeah, bad things happen. We carry the sins of Adam.
Yeah, I don't. I think those kinds of things. I think that's one of the more rational explanations that I've heard for that. I guess that kind of leads me into something else that I want to discuss. There's a lot of especially in Christianity, but in other religions too. There's a lot of like really negative human attributes that we give to God in like a positive light. Because like what you just described comes off to me as very petty. And there's a really common sentiment in Christianity that God's a jealous God. Like
Yeah,
that to me feels so ridiculous that a divine perfect being somehow has this extremely uncomfortable and volatile human emotion, um, to the point to where he would like hurt his favorite creation over. This seems very bizarre to me. That feels like people trying to shrink God down into a very digestible man-like figure?
We have responsibilities to God. Especially those of us. Okay. I don't want to say those of us, because that's not what I mean. I don't want to refer to myself on this. People who are God's chosen people have responsibilities to God. When God says, "I am a jealous God," it's because you will have no God before me. I am God, and if you do, I'm gonna punish you for it. If you make false idols, I'm gonna punish you for it. It's not. What's a good way to put it? It's not so much pettiness as, because I think pettiness is the wrong way to look at it. Think of it this way: if I gave you,
guidance?
well, partly, but think about it this way: if I gave you, let's say, I gave you $100 a day, every day, and I said, okay, just recognize that I'm giving you $100 a day. And then somebody else came along and gave you a bottle cap. And you went, this bottle cap is fucking amazing. I love this bottle cap. It's so good. I'm going to sacrifice people because you've given me a bottle cap. Because every god asks for things. It's not just the Abrahamic god that was like asking for things. All gods ask for things.
Sure.
It's a reciprocal relationship. So God's argument is, I am giving you $100 a week. You better be fucking grateful for that, because you're the people I've chosen to give $100 a week to. And if you go in and worship this motherfucker who's giving you a bottle cap, I'm going to be pissed about it. I'm going to be fucked off that you've done it. Because again, like, it's not so much pettiness as humanity was put on a pedestal, especially within Christianity. Islam's slightly different. So, like, and this is, again, an interesting difference between the Quran and, say, the Bible. In the Bible, God makes everything and then goes, humanity, you are the stewards. You are the stewards. I have made you to be in charge of things. It's going to be great. And humanity goes, of course, God, sure. In Islam, God makes everything, and then he goes to, I probably have the order wrong here, but he goes to the mountains, and the mountains are like, nah, we're good being big and tall and rocky. He's like, okay, cool. He goes to the oceans, and the oceans are like, no, we're good. We don't want to be in charge of everything. And he goes to the sky. Do you want to be in charge? No, we're good. And then he goes, okay, look, humans, I will put you in charge of everything, but please don't fuck it up. Please don't fuck it up. Look, just it'll be fine. I'm just saying, please don't fuck it up. But humans did fuck it up. So a lot of this is getting back in God's good graces, because we didn't just kind of like fuck up ourselves. We fucked up everything. Like, the whole garden is destroyed. An entire state of being is fallen. So it is a test to see whether we have learned anything so far. But yeah, it's why it matters, because you've got to understand, it's not just from the perspective of what are we doing. Religion, like at least the Abrahamic religions, are in a state where we're not the only creations to kind of turn around and tell God to fuck off. A large contingent of angels turned around and told God to fuck off, which didn't happen in Islam, by the way. Islam doesn't have free will for angels. They're completely deterministic.
Yeah.
Which is why jinn basically fill that gap. Interestingly, again, bit of a tangent, but jinn are basically, again, pagan gods. Quite literally. They are like the gods of Socrates. And that's because, like, in Islam is very, very heavily linked to Aristotle, in the same way Christianity is very heavily linked to Plato. Which also explains an awful lot about the way the two religions have very different ethics. But yeah, so basically, it's not that the idea of, well, who is God to tell me what to do, is a very human view. We fucked up really badly. We are not in a good position. So yeah, there is quite a lot to prove, because the question is, well, are we worth keeping around as a creation?
Okay.
And there's an important part
Little
of
things like that,
determinism
but
here. Well,
I'm
there's
willing to let things move forward for the sake of the conversation. But
well, okay.
it's a little weird.
Let me just well, we can swing around to it. It's fine. Let me just say something quickly about determinism as well, because one of the really common criticisms of this is, well, if God knows everything
Yeah,
and He knows what we're going to do, why would He create people that inevitably are going to end up in hell? Right?
sure.
That's not quite how it works. God knows everything. God is everywhere and every when. He knows what our decisions are going to be, but we are still the ones who make those decisions. It's God's just at the other end of it. So we're still free to make whatever decisions we make. God's not forcing us to make those decisions. He just knows what the outcomes are. We are still free because we're experiencing time in a linear way and making those choices as we go. God's just not experiencing it in a linear way.
Yeah, you could like if you knew for 100% fact that you had free will and nothing was deterministic, but you could see your entire life play out ahead of time. Does it all of a sudden become deterministic? No. It'd be like the same idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Something having knowledge of something ahead of time doesn't necessarily mean determinism. It just means that they saw the end. That's it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask you is why do you think that I think like even the word henotheistic has like gone away. Like nobody looks at like Abrahamic religions as being henotheistic early on. Like it's never discussed. We don't even just like even the word's gone. I think it's very very bizarre that the idea that early Christians and Jews recognize the fact that there's other gods, but just that there is a God that's above all of them. That's just like gone.
A lot of that's to do with Augustine. So again, like it's the idea that, well, there were, because when Augustine's making the arguments in City Gods against the pagans, he's not arguing that the pagan gods don't exist. He's arguing that they're demons. So it's not that the idea of kind of like multiple gods on different sides and everything else went away. It's just that we just don't call those gods anymore within the Abrahamic faiths.
I think that's really interesting considering how like I very strictly think that Jesus is modeled after Saturn. The depictions of Jesus and depictions of Saturn are essentially identical. Um, but Saturn is very very unlike Jesus. It's almost as if somebody tried to smuggle in this dark, terrible God's image onto the face of what is supposed to be the savior for one of the world's major religions.
Yeah, that's actually not a surprise because that happens a surprising amount. So, like, let's look at like Ragnarok as a good example of this. When Ragnarok happens, it's not the world ends and everything's terrible. It's the world ends, the old gods die, and the new better creator god turns up. And it's almost like someone smuggled Christianity into the Norse religion. And in Irish religion, because we know weird amounts about old school Irish tribal religion, it's a case where kind of like, oh yes, there were all these fae and other gods, but they weren't the true god. The true god has always been there and came to Ireland first and has been waiting. And that's because one of Christianity's conversion methods was basically to smuggle itself into pagan religion. Like sort of pagan in the kind of like general pagan sense, or even classical pagan religion, and basically kind of retcon other religions to say that they were all like in preparation for Christianity, because it's a good conversion method. So it's
Yeah,
not a surprise that you see those overlaps aren't Christianity stealing things. A lot of the time, those overlaps are built into the way we've interpreted those religions because they've been corrupted over significant periods of time
sure,
by
but the
Christian
Saturn thing would
scholars.
be bad for Christianity if people. I think if people understood like it's like Saturn is like the god of death and destruction. It's a god of like significant obedience. So, like if you don't listen to him, like you die. and like greed. Like that's why like all the ring symbolism, like wedding rings and like the halo, like all these symbolisms come from
Sure, but
Saturn.
the
So
idea of
that's why I said
God,
it seems like somebody maliciously snuck the image in. But I guess that's sort of like a side point to that.
hmm,
That Christianity, it's like everybody knows that things have been taken from other religions, but like it's essentially Xerox copied from the Egyptian religion. And I think it's very hard to square this.
you'd have to defend that. What
Um,
do you think is Eros copied from from Egyptian religion?
so the story of Jesus is essentially just the story of Horus's life, from the number of people that he traveled with, the disciples, the baptism at the age of 12, started congregation at the age of 30, being the son of a virgin, Isis Mary, even the same name, Mary. Like basically everything that Jesus did, Horus did first. And then the Ten Commandments are from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. I have not killed became thou shalt not kill. I have not stolen. Thou shalt not steal. Like these things are like there's an immense amount of things that just like Horus did first. And if you look at the Mediterranean, there's a ton of things that look like they were like sort of sample pulled from, but Egypt is like the bedrock of like
So
Christian.
part of this is how we look at ancient religions.
Yeah,
So the Egyptian religion is not a stable religion.
sure.
So, for instance, like when you look at Ra, Ra goes from the head god to senile and insane over like 2,000 years. There is in like the whole thing of Ra getting on a boat and sailing around through his entire like death and resurrection ritual
Mhm.
is because Ra was old and insane at this point. Ra created an entire god that basically was just killing people. That's all it did. Ra was pissed off. I forgot which god it is. It's the one with the tiger head. He made her because people were noticing he was old and insane, and he got really pissed off about it. So took a fragment of himself, made a god out of it, and then just was like, "Yeah, go fuck people up." Um,
Well,
but
it's not
it's
as though I don't
probably
think there was good marketing applied here, but like it seems like the foundations of the entire faith were pulled from another religion, not like a collective bits for like I said, like most people think. Most people think like some things were borrowed to recruit people, but if this just
so.
is
So part of
the
the problem
numbers are
is
staggering,
so
especially
so
concerning
part
Jesus.
part of the problem with like the Horus Jesus stuff
Mhm.
is it's not as clear cut as people think. Um, and also kind of messiah narratives are not that uncommon in the ancient world. Plus, you're talking about religions with an awful lot of overlap. Judaism, like we've got good evidence that Judaism changed. There's arguments that Judaism was polytheistic at one point
Well, they were
for quite a
henotheistic.
significant. Well, no, no,
Yeah.
no, polytheistic. Actually, polytheistic, as in they had two deities they worshipped, a male and a female. Um, like there was a point in there's evidence there's a point in Jewish history where they had a female counterpart to God
Mhm.
as a separate being, and that just disappeared over time. Um, the idea that religions again are stagnant just isn't. It doesn't really bear true. There's no reason to assume that. We have lost so much knowledge about ancient religions that we kind of look at them as mythologies that are just set at one point in history.
But
But they're not. They're living, growing. Um, a lot of its overlap. Again, like the flood narrative appears in multiple religions.
yeah.
There's things you could argue with Vishnu, for example, have like parallels to Christ. Um,
Yeah, but nothing really compares to like Horus and Jesus, like the 12 disciples baptized at 30, crucified, buried, resurrected. Um, and all, I mean, and all of these things have these same things in common because it's all astrology. Jesus is the sun. And the sun moves through the 12 constellations. That's why there's always 12 disciples. The reason why the supposed birthday is December 25th is because the sun sits on the cross on December 25th, the Southern Crux constellation. And on the 25th of December, it moves 1 degree up. So, like it was said, for all eyes to see up in heaven, Jesus was dead on the cross for 3 days and then was resurrected for all eyes to see. This is an ancient telling of the story of the sun. which is why we know that Horus is a sun god, um, and like it's the story of the sun traveling. And I think that the reason why all these things are so tightly knit back to the Egyptian religion is because I think the Egyptian religion was like unabashedly like was known to the people. This is the story of the sun, which is between that and I think that's why we get like halos. That's why we get a lot of basically everything about the story that like you can track like this comes from astrology. Even like the being born of a virgin, like what Virgo's the virgin, and that's God, I'm losing my train of thought here.
No.
There's just a plethora of things about these stories that show that this was a way for ancient civilizations to track the movement of the sun through these stories, so that they could have viable agriculture. And you can't explain to people communication was not the best in like understandings and like writing things down and all that, but if you make a grand story out of it and people knew these things, it'd be much easier for the average person to track the movements of the sun, be able to prepare for winter, and get their things ready in the spring. And then it just sort of like merges into these stories that people kind of believe. When that's not so useful anymore, and people develop like good calendars and like have like some kind of an almanac type of thing, people that don't know that these stories were used for that, when they're the only ones left, and the people that did know what the stories for die, now you just have a bunch of true believers that have different tools to track the sun, but they still have the stories, and the stories just mean what the stories say now. And then as we move further and further along, that faith just has less and less opposition to going like, no, guys, that's just literally how we used to tell where the sun is. It's cool that you guys have these tools now, but like, that's what you use now. That's what the stories were for. And that's why even some places that didn't have connections with each other will have really similar stories about their gods. It was a really good way to track the sun and communicate this to people pretty good distances in their civilizations.
Sure. Because I need to. So, okay. With stuff like the Horus Jesus comparison, because we're kind of on 2 points here of like, well, how good are these things for tracking? How good are these for explaining, and how good are these for like imparting knowledge? Like, certainly, like most religions set their religious holidays around particular calendar points, harvest festivals. Even within Christianity, you're like, well, the birth's probably different. As is the death times, theoretically. Because if you want to spread a religion, you want to make it easy for people to believe. With the Horus Jesus stuff, it's been a long time since I've read into it.
That was my main reason for that was because Jesus, we didn't really need the tools like that, but back in the times of the Egyptians, really did need stories to help convey important agricultural information.
I just want to, I've just pulled up a list of some of the claims. I just want to dispute some of them. So, claim Horus was conceived by a virgin mother named Mary and had a stepfather named Seb Joseph. Truth: Horus was not conceived a virgin. In fact, mural and textual evidence from Egypt indicates Isis. There is no evidence that Mary was ever part of a name. Hovered over the erect penis she created of Osiris to conceive Horus, because Osiris had been like chopped to pieces. While she may have been a virgin before conception, she utilizes Osiris's penis to conceive. She's also a god. This isn't like Mary's deified. Mary's not deified. She's ascended. It's slightly different, and it works into like the Catholic idea of how saints and martyrs perform. Claim Horus was born in a cave. His birth announced by an angel, heralded by a star. There is no reference to a cave or manger in Egyptian birth stories of Horus. In fact, none of the details are present in ancient Egyptian stories of Horus. Horus was born in a swamp. His birth was not heralded by an angel. There was no star. Claim Horus attended a special ritual of passage at the age of 12, and there is no data on the child from the age of 12 to 30. There is no continuous effort in Horus's mythology to account for all these years, so there's no real gaps in the chronology. Horus never taught in any temple at 12, as did Jesus. Horus was baptized in a river at age of 30. Horus was never baptized, while conspiracy theorists often point to Anup the baptizer. There is no such person in Horus's story. Horus had 12 disciples. Horus had only 4 disciples, called Hereshum, But at some point in the story, there is a reference to 16 followers and a group of unnumbered followers who join Horus in battle, called Mensu. Horus performed miracles, exorcised demons, raised someone from the dead, and walked on water. Horus certainly performed miracles. He was, after all, described as a god, but there's no mention of exorcising demons. Yeah, again, that would be a weird claim because there's no real foundation for that in Egyptian religion until Crowley comes along, funnily enough. Raising people from dead or walking on water. Horus was also called Asa, or ever-becoming son, or the Holy Child. No one in Egyptian history was ever called Asu. The word does not exist. My pronunciations of this are crap, by the way, but nor has anyone been called Holy Child. Claim: Horus delivered a sermon on the Mount, and his followers recounted his sayings. Truth: Horus never delivered a sermon on the Mount, nor was transfigured. Yeah, I've never seen that anywhere we're told in the Horus story. Horus was crucified between two thieves. Horus is not reported to have died at all in the vast majority of Egyptian narratives. Yeah, he just turns up, kills the dude who killed his dad, and becomes god. There is also no crucifixion story. Instead, Horus is usually described as eventually merging with Re, or Ra, the sun god, after which he dies and is reborn every day as the sun rises. There is a parallel account describing Horus's death in detail, how he was cast into pieces into the water, later fished by a crocodile at Isis' request. Horus was called Way, Truth, Light, Messiah, and Anointed Son. None of these titles are in Egyptian history, but Horus is called by several names you might expect of a god's mythology: Great God, Chief of Power, Masters of Heaven. Horus was the Fisher. So yeah, I mean, like I can.
I do have a list of Egyptologists and other
I'd have to delve into it because
yeah.
I'd have to delve in because the truth is like I've heard the Horus story retold a few times, and I'm going to be honest with you, a lot of the claims I've just not heard until general stuff. And part of the problem is, so part of the problem with a lot of this stuff is it gets corrupted over time and stuff gets inserted. So let's just take a myth that's not religious. I just wanted to like read out a list of just what the claims are and just fucking throw disputes, because people can be like, yeah, this definitely happened. This was a thing in the original myth. Are you familiar with the story of the King Arthur?
Yeah.
Can you describe to me the original? Can you describe to me the original story of King Arthur, just in a nutshell?
Oh, just vaguely.
Just in a nutshell.
King Arthur. He had like the Knights of the Round Table, and that's I don't know. No, not really. I have a vague understanding of it.
But you're aware. Okay, so you're aware of people.
For refresher course, it'll come back. Yeah, that kind of.
Sure.
Thing.
So you're aware of like Lancelot, Galahad, Search for the Holy Grail, Lady of the Lake, all that kind of shit, right?
Yeah.
None of that is in the original myth. None of it. It is all additions from like fucking France, like 50 years later. Like King Arthur is largely fucking fan fiction. It is largely fan fiction that became canon. And part of the problem is when we look at things like Egyptian religion lasted something like 4,000 to 6,000 years. That was 8,000 years ago when that religion theoretically started.
True.
When we're talking about what's in it and the parallels, it is very difficult to talk about a dead religion that was wiped off the face of the globe that we only really started to understand or even study fairly recently, comparatively. When we're talking about... Go on.
Well, I just want to point out that even if none of this happened in the Egyptian religions, I still think that the explanations and tracking these stories through the zodiac makes perfect sense as to why so many religions do have these characteristics from the Mediterranean area pre-Christianity.
Sure, I'm actually
why these deities exist in these ways and did these things, because it's the story of the sun. I think the Egyptians had to have that for that to be the case.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you from in that regard. I think that is a very reasonable read of kind of why people believe certain things. And I think it's reasonable enough to believe, to look at religion as explanations of... What's a good way to put this? it is reasonable to believe that religions like take things from astrology and kind of explanations of the modern of the world around them. I think that's a very reasonable thing to kind of come to conclusions about. I just don't see it as highly likely that what's a good way to put this? Generally speaking, when we look at religions that are pretty old, they're usually about power structures for things like the royal classes, for example. That tends to be the reason that these things are presented in the way that they are. Like when we look at, like,
I'm not suggesting that that Christianity is only that. I think that Christianity is lifted from part of the Egyptian religion and then discarded anything that doesn't serve its purpose, and then added onto and built around that. I'm not saying that like these two religions are. When I say it was Xeroxed over, I mean the parts that they took sections of it and Xeroxed it over to make the foundation for Christianity, and then added like their own bells and whistles to it too. Does that make more sense?
That makes more sense.
I wasn't maybe super clear when I said that initially. I'm not used to having a good conversation like this. A lot of this stuff is just in my head, and I never really get to say it to other people. So I might have stumbled a little bit.
You're fine. Don't stress at all. It's really easy to get into conspiracy theories. Crowley would be very happy. But truthfully, religions are, like, even within Christian denominations. Like, a really good example is Peter Jordanson. You know, the radio host dude?
Peter Jordanson?
Yeah, he's like a black guy. He did this whole kind of like he does this thing where he's like, beta.
Oh,
like talk
Jesse
today.
Lee Peterson.
Jesse Lee Peterson. There we go. Fuck yeah.
Amazing.
Jesse Lee Peterson. Amazing. He doesn't believe Jesus is like part of God. He didn't believe like Jesus was immortal. And I'm like, you're not fucking Christian then. Like, there are some fundamental things that, like, even people were like, yeah, I'm a Christian, this is really important to me. And I'm like, you fundamentally misunderstand your own religion. Which is wild. And again, so if we looked at...
Is he non-denominational Christian?
No, he's like, fuck, what is he? Someone we can... Oh, so many people don't believe in the Trinity.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's difficult because, what's a good way to put this? When talking about what people believed and what was lifted and what was taken, let's say the whole of Christianity was wiped from the face of the earth, and the only thing you had left was Jordan Lee Peterson.
Jesse, but yeah.
Jesse, whatever. Yeah, fuck my brain.
You don't want people Googling Jordan Peterson now, do we?
I don't know, man. Like, Jordan Peterson, like, says a lot of wacky shit, but I really like his suit. I really like that red and blue suit. I think it's really fucking cool. It's great.
He does have
insane thing to wear, but fucking amazing. If we just had him as a reference point, people would be like, well, this religion sounds fucking bizarre, and it sounds like it doesn't have a lot of consistent sense. It's like, well, yeah, it's just one guy. And this is part of the problem. Like, we have incomplete information, poorly presented and stored and handed out to people. It's difficult. But yeah, ultimately, I think the main thing is making sure that... okay, what's the question? Does it matter? Does it matter? I think is the main thing. Like, does it matter how Christianity found truth? Because within Christianity, it doesn't matter. So let's take... I know that sounds like a weird statement, but let's take the translation of the Bible in the first place. The translation of the Bible was done when it was done into Latin, was done by 3 people who'd all do a translation, and then they'd come out to have that translation checked. And so let's take, like, the Virgin Mary in that. Virgin Mary isn't the only translation. An equally correct translation, and the one that was generally accepted at the time, was Maiden Mary. Virgin wasn't a thing. But they all came out with Virgin. That was how they all translated it. And they said, okay, well, if you've all translated it as Virgin, then that is a sign for God that that's what that word should be. So that's why it's Virgin Mary. That's why people are like, well, it was never Virgin Mary, it was Maiden Mary. It was, but the fact that we know she is a virgin is divine intervention.
Yeah.
Because God does intervene. In the selection of the books, God intervenes. He moves through us. So a lot of the stuff when people go, well, this is just stuff humans selected. Well, the Catholic response is, well, that's not really true, because God moves through us when we are doing his works.
Somebody asked if you've been smoking weed in my chat, and I was
No.
gonna address them. Say no. No, Stoic. You've just been smoking cigarettes.
No, I don't smoke weed. I have been drinking, but only a little bit.
I stopped smoking weed like 4 years ago. I smoked for like 12, 13 years, and I just stopped.
I've smoked weed twice in my life. Both experiences were not good. I don't enjoy marijuana.
It's not good fun. If I try it anymore. It gives me anxiety now.
Yeah, it always made me really, really depressed. So every time, like, I'd be fine when I was high, but then, like, I'd just get really fucking depressed, and it sucked. So yeah, stop doing it. But yeah. Oh, god damn it.
I guess I could lighten it up a bit by asking, what religion do you think has the best stories? Because I feel like modern day religions like kind of suck in the terms of their storytelling. We had like the Greeks and Romans that had like super badass stories, and now
African religions. African folklore religions are by far the best, by miles. They're much more complex. In that I've forgotten the name of it. I've forgotten his name. But there's one kind of African mythological tale where basically a special child gets born, thrown out by his father. I'm going to give you the nutshell. Thrown out by his father because the prophecy is he's going to like. No. His father just wanted daughters because he wanted to marry them off for money. His father was king, and that was like, you know, a good dowry thing. So he didn't want a son. Son's a special godchild. Basically, he grows up, overthrows his father. His uncles die during the process. He resurrects them. He becomes king. He doesn't like kill his father. He exiles him. And then later on, he kills a giant Hydra-looking motherfucker who happens to be blood brothers with another god. And rather than the god sort of like fucking doing the Greek thing of like, oh, you're fucked now, this god came down and said, you shouldn't fucking have done that. What's wrong with you? You need to think about your actions. Took him up to the heavens for a year, where he basically found out that for all his power, he was a very small fish in comparison to things like the fucking sun. And then he got sent down to Earth again and ruled peacefully. And you've got like multiple morals within that story. So like, you need your family. Family is important. Don't be needlessly fucking vengeful and wrathful, like with his father, like exiling him and things, and like being like reasonable and forgive us when people like realize they've fucked up is important. Don't just take rash actions and think without acting, because you might end up killing the blood brother of an actual fucking god. And you are a small fish, no matter how fucking powerful you are. Those are really important moral stories that you just don't get in equivalent European mythology and religion by anywhere near it. And there's loads of stuff that's like lost because Europeans suck at colonization, and we destroy everything. But yeah, the more we seem to like get out of anthropological stories from Africa, the more it seems that they are like fucking amazing. And they're like way, way better at imparting morals and knowledge than ours are.
Is that Zulu that you're talking about?
I'd have to check. And I don't have it on hand at the moment. I'll give you an update at some point, but yeah.
Okay.
I think it's Central Africa. Anyway. But yeah, like again, like African religion's really interesting. If you want like horror stories, go and study like modern Muti. If you want like, I don't know, quite nice general stuff, like ancient Muti is pretty interesting what we know about it. So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know a lot about I don't know a lot of tribal religion nearly as much as the more structured religions like throughout history. Um, Mostly because when I did the majority of my studying, there wasn't really anything to point me to that. The internet was kind of shit when I was a teenager. I was a lot of books. I had a lot of books, and if the library
What do
didn't
you?
have it,
Okay. Well, what's your favorite?
uh, I think I like I can't think of his name now, but the founder of Jainism, I really liked that one.
I have a massive fucking blind spot for Hinduism, like generally. Um, I've found like I know some of the myths and things, but I've never looked harder into it. What did you like about it?
Well, Jainism isn't Hinduism. Uh, Jainism is like if Buddhism is vegetarian, Jainism is like mega vegan. Uh, so it's a similar.
I'm so fucking bad on Jainism, but yeah, no, go on.
It's sort of like it's sort of like a retelling of the Buddha story, but like on steroids. This guy's the guy in question was royalty, and his parents died, and he grieved so much that he left, and he swore that he wouldn't speak for 5 years. And as a result of this, he's been like beaten and uh, like just had his life destroyed from not speaking. The decision that he made to not speak, and throughout the course of this, he learned that like certain vegetables have souls, and that we need to that insects have souls. So much that like Jains today have insect hospitals, and you can't eat eggplants. And they're also some of the most wealthy people in the entire world now. They like being jewelers is like a big part of like being a Jain. Like if you're a jeweler and if you're a Jain and you're a jeweler, like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And I just think that it's like while it doesn't have like a lot of the bells and whistles, just like the end result of it, like as you read the story and then the conclusions that he comes to from the story, just explosively entertaining to me.
Yeah, I can see that. I like that. I
And you can't if somebody hits you, you can't fight back. If somebody robs you, you just have to like let them do it. It is probably the hardest religion to actually follow. So like I said, they have insect hospitals. You could not swat a fly or a mosquito if it bit you.
I will admit I try not to kill insects.
Uh, Me too. I can remember the all the spiders that I've killed in the last 8 years. Two.
I like spiders too much to kill them.
They freak me out.
Usually, really?
Have you ever had a
Why?
bad spider bite? Because I
Yeah.
lived in a house that has so I live in Michigan, and we have things called Michigan basements, and they're built to like take in flood. Like so when your basement gets flooded, they do, they have like drainage systems built and stuff. So they tend to be really musty and stuff. I lived in a house that had a fuck ton of spiders in the basement, and my mom wasn't gonna like make the landlord do anything about it. So I would get spider bites all over when I slept. Like I would just have like these bumps with like two little holes in them, and they would be itchy, and sometimes they'd get really bad. So I don't like spiders and I also lived in another place that had bad spiders because I've been bitten by so many fucking spiders. And
You
spider
should
bites
feed them more.
suck.
Feed them more. Just buy some flies. Just release flies.
I lived near the lake then, and trust me, there was no shortage of flies. It's back when I didn't have any qualms about killing bugs. I think in like one session of picking up the fly swatter, I counted 54 flies that I swatted, and there were still so many in the house. It's ridiculous. Living near lakes is awful.
What's what's the I suppose my question is like you spend a lot of time studying religion. So for me, what drove me towards studying religion was well, the fact that I left like the Catholic Church and was like lost my faith in that. What drove you?
I think the first thing that sparked it was there was this kid. My mom was at the doctor's, and I was in the waiting room, like playing with the crappy doctor's office toys. And this kid sort of like loosely explained to me what being saved was in Christianity. But he explained it super duper bad. And then I heard that, and then I would just notice how often people were so certain about their ideas about religion. That's probably like 9 or 10, but they were so different from each other. And then I also had a friend who was him and his mom were both Wiccan, and I was like, this is completely different than what everybody else thinks. And my mom was a non-denominational Christian, which means I just want to make up my own rules and still go to heaven. So I just had like a lot of weird religion in my life, and it just like none of it seemed to line up. So I was like, I need to figure out what the fuck's going on here. Too many people are saying too many things. I need to look into this for myself because it seems like nobody knows what the fuck they're talking about. And if I want to have an idea about what this is about, I need to look in books and see what is actually going on. Because if it just nothing made any sense to me when people said it. And so I was probably so at that point I just didn't believe in anything when I was 13. I know when I was 13 is when I really started getting into it. I was like the youngest atheist I ever knew because like I can't believe anything. I gotta figure stuff out. Because it just seems like everybody's crazy. They're like high on this drug of religion, and I just want to know what's going on. And it just sort of like I was like it was like I was obsessed. Like I was like a glutton. I just needed to eat as much information about religion as possible because I just couldn't deal with all the religious people around me in conflict with each other. What their ideas in conflict inside of me having heard them. Does that make sense? Or did I get weird and not explain things well?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. What conclusions have you come to?
Um, I think that if there is like a monotheistic kind of God, I think that if you seek that God, that's how you'll find him. I think that you could find God through the Bible. I think that you could find God through a different path. I don't think of God as a fickle being that goes, well, if you didn't reach out to me in the name of Jesus, I don't want to talk to you. If you don't say my son's name, we're not talking. We can't have a relationship. I don't think of God like that. I think if there is an overall God, potentially a creator, that if you seek, you'll find it. And if you have to like really be open and be willing to interpret things that are going to be not somebody with a mouth speaking in your ear kind of ways. Um, because that's the only thing that I can really make sense of. There seems to be like there's a lot of agreement about certain things in religion, but then some religion, like a lot of people say that all religions basically say the same thing. Get the fuck out of here with that shit. That's not true. There's a lot of common themes in a lot of religions. There's a lot of religions that throw all that shit in the trash and do their own thing too. Um, so I think that that's probably where I stand with like monotheism. I think that polytheistic religions are probably better in that we don't see the same kind of outcomes from them. There's not a whole lot of people willing to die for their collective handful of gods in the same kind of ways that like monotheistic, like I'm the boss kind of gods do. Um,
I don't know. I think you've got like plenty of pagan gods that are pretty. You're going to do what I fucking say, or you're going to be in trouble.
uh,
Um,
well, those be more like henotheistic people, right? They're like the Greeks. Like, I'm not saying Athena doesn't exist. Just Zeus is my god. I do what Zeus says. Like, yeah, I know Athena's real, but like, I don't give a fuck. Zeus is my god. Those would be the kinds of people they're gonna go out and kill. But if you have a collective of gods, if there's several celestial beings for different aspects about life, then you're probably gonna be a little bit more balanced and not so insecure about your stuff. Um, but I also think that if there is any kind of like creator, even if there's the case that there's like lots of little gods and then like one big one, I think the greatest evidence of like there being a creator god is medicine. I think that the fact that there's so many things that can fuck up life and attack life, and yet there's solutions to them. Why would there be solutions to these things? It doesn't make any sense to me that so many things would be able to fix problems by accident. Like we have cool things like symmetry, but these are all things that are objectively nice. Like symmetry is are subjectively nice. Things like the what's the fucking spiral? The Fibonacci sequence, that's subjectively cool. That's still like a pattern that we're recognizing. But the fact that there are terrible things that can happen and solutions to these terrible things, that blows my fucking mind. The fact that you could get cancer and we're able to develop drugs to be able to fix those, there's no reason for those things to exist. even things that we don't have cures for, we think that there's a way. Like we generally accept the idea that eventually we'll find a way to fix these things. That to me suggests that there may be something that was looking out for life when everything became.
When everything became.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you would like, you can tell me why you think that's crazy.
I don't know if I think it's crazy. I think that, again, I can talk a lot from like the Catholic perspective and Christian perspective and kind of pagan cult perspective, but from mine, I mean, I personally think that the point of existence is to exist. I think the point of creation is creation for its own sake. Personally speaking,
That's a pretty Tao answer, my guy.
yeah. Well, I'm not. Look, I'm not saying I'm a Taoist, but I am saying that I spend a lot of time thinking about whether I'm an empty pot or not.
Did you ever read the Analects out of curiosity?
As in Confucian.
Yeah.
Bits of. Actually, I made a fucking video on Confucianism. It's on my YouTube channel. It's from it's 5 minutes long. It was for a uni project. There are fucking issues with it, but
I'm gonna check it out.
Yeah,
because my favorite idea about life after death comes from Confucianism.
I don't know the idea of life after death for Confucianism. Well, I mean, I'm assuming it's like ancestor, so like you sort of just hang around and help your family.
No, it's so much cooler than that. It's Zhu says to Confucius, Confucius, what of death? Confucius says to Zhu, Zhu, you do not yet know of life. How can you begin to understand death?
I do like that.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah, no, I like Confucius. I've got a weird thing to say about a dead philosopher. I've got a lot of time for Confucius. But I mean, Confucius came from a particular period. Like it's really, again, I like so many fucking religions. So when Confucius started writing, it was just at the end of the spring and autumn period, and China had just been at war with itself for like a significant period of time. And the spring and autumn period, for those who don't know, was fucking crazy. You had basically like the emperor gets deposed, all the major fucking families and kingdoms go to war, and kind of like warlords go to war with each other. Eventually, it's won by a minor lord at the beginning of the war, who then becomes emperor for like 15 years before he's overthrown by a peasant revolt. And it's just the most fucking insane. Ancient Chinese history is fucking wild.
It is. I think it's one of the best histories of people doing things, though. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's so much condensed into such a short period. But
yeah,
I think what's interesting about kind of Confucius in that regard is a lot of Confucius's, when you read into it in that context, is like, please stop killing each other. Please just accept your place in society. Accept that you have responsibilities and people have responsibilities to you, and please stop fucking killing each other. It's getting ridiculous.
Well, I think there's a subtext of when you're doing that, find, create, and appreciate beauty as well.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
And I think that's why people should read Confucius, because a lot of the ideas are based on problems that aren't really the same anymore, but there's lessons that he puts out there that I don't know if it's surface level or not. It's just something I picked up on right away, that there's an importance to recognizing the things in life that are beautiful and appreciating them. And for somebody who lived in that time period, that's kind of that's not a profound thing to say today, but then it was kind of a profound thing to say and kind of a big idea to put out there to people.
I could see that. I don't know. I think that, again, even with things like Christianity that we view as kind of mundane, there's a lot of really amazing things within Christianity that I don't think people really appreciate. Appreciate, is that the right word? Is that the word I want to use? Sure. Fuck it. Appreciate.
Do you maybe just observe? Because I think there's a lot of stuff that just gets missed entirely. They don't even see it.
Do I mean observe? I don't know. I don't know if I mean observe.
Fair.
I think it's people. Let's see where to put it. So I'm trying to find the right words and trying to make sure I'm saying what I want to say. No, appreciate. Like, we simplify Christianity down because we view it through the lens in which it's presented to us in our culture. But it's not a... There's a reason Christianity became as popular as it did. And there's a reason that Christianity has stood the test of time, and became so dominant. And there are multiple reasons for that. There's a lot of things in Christianity that, especially for the periods at which it started to emerge, were really fucking good. Christianity is probably, like, of its time, the most feminist religion. Not by today's standards, by any fucking means.
Okay.
But, like, when you look at, like, religions of the period, if you're a woman, you are sort of like, your sins are essentially not your sins. They are the responsibility of your husband. Women were seen as lesser. There's a reason that Christianity spread amongst women so quickly, and it was because you became responsible for your own shit. You had duties and responsibilities to God as a woman that you would be judged on separately from your partner. Which was actually pretty fucking radical. In a lot of ways. When you look at, like, let's look at, like, Greek and Roman religion. Like, women are universally things that get raped by Zeus and occasionally allowed to become hunters. And I think there's only like one Greek myth where that goes well for, like, the girl in question. And even then, her love interest, like, fucking dies. Christianity doesn't have much of that. Like, women become martyrs. Women become saints. Mary and Mary Magdalene are fundamental to the Jesus story. The first priests were women. The people who stuck by Jesus when his disciples abandoned him because they were terrified were women. The people who dressed as wounds were women. Women had a very key role in the religion that just wasn't common in other religions. Again, not feminist by today's standard. But one of the things you've got to understand is there's this sort of narrative that religions spread because states enforce them. But that's only half true. Religions, with the exception of Islam, tend to get adopted by states, and then they become state religions. With the exception, I'd argue anyway, with Islam. Islam is a religion that created a state, which is why
so did Christianity. Like, the Vatican
no,
was
not really.
quite a force.
Not really. Like, and the things like the Vatican, again, are the state creating something because Rome adopted Christianity. But Christianity had already spread for, like, a significant period of time. And that was largely through conversion of families, because women convert families. Women overwhelmingly decide what a family believes. They're the ones that tend to educate the children. They're the ones that, they go, humans haven't changed that much. If your wife really wants to fucking do something, you do what your wife wants to do, because it's just partly just because it's fucking easier.
I do what my wife wants to do because she's very cute, and it's very hard to say no to her.
Fair enough. For whatever fucking reason, but yeah, women overwhelmingly tend to lead the zeitgeist of families.
I don't know if I've ever been in that kind of a position. So when my kid was born, my kid's mother agreed with me that we would raise our kid without religion. And that was like the one thing that she did stick to when we weren't together anymore. She did not, she actually fought against anybody trying to put any religion anywhere near our kid. That's probably the thing I respect the most about her. I think that, I think not having your kid grow up on myths and stories as fact gives them kind of a leg up in terms of thinking. but then it also has the downfall of them blurting out that Santa's not real to other kids and ruining their Christmases. But um, I think that I think is it China. I used to drive for Lyft and I picked up a guy from China and he told me that while the official religion of the country is Buddhism, it is considered exceptionally poor manners to talk to anybody under the age of 18 about religion. You're supposed to just leave kids alone when it comes to religion. You shouldn't put any of that on them. That's something to decide when you're an adult. Um,
Do you know
and I
there's an entire religion we basically only know existed because of the Quran called Sabianism, which was a religion of conversion. You couldn't grow. It's an Abrahamic religion, but they, from what we can tell, they worship stars. I say worship. They believe stars were angels, so they talk to stars. Um, but yeah, we only really know about them because I mean they just disappeared. Um, and part of the reason that they disappeared, at least the working theory is because they were a religion of conversion.
um, they have like a relationship to like Zoroastrianism.
Not sure. Like
There's like
again,
an
the
overlap
the
there.
information the information on them is incredibly fucking limited. Because they just fucking disappeared. Generally speaking, you want people around you to believe the same thing.
There's a lot of
Most
strength in
people
that,
want
yeah.
to believe that. You know, that's kind of the core.
It's a good way
Um,
to start a tribe and keep
well,
it
it's a good
strong,
way to
yeah.
keep unity. I mean, we're in group animals.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, you can
That sort
imagine
of.
it didn't go over very well with a lot of my schoolmates that I was not religious as a at a pretty young age. I was actually assaulted in school for not being a Christian
See, I
because
had the
that's what
opposite
Jesus would do.
experience. See, I had the opposite experience. I was quite religious as a kid, and everyone thought that was weird.
I just think different areas. I think when I was like 15, we moved to like a really small town that had 11 churches in 1 square mile. So that was rough. But even before that, though, I lived in like a fairly big city and a big school, and my best friends stopped being friends with me when I started delving into religion, and I was like, I'm not Christian. I remember distinctly one of my friends threw a basketball at my balls, and said, "That's for God." And like him and the other kids like in that friend group weren't my friend anymore.
That's a real Jesus bro moment. Jesus bro. Sorry. That fucking movie.
I think a lot of
Um,
times I think of it as a tool that we used to have that we don't need anymore. But I see some issues where that might be wrong sometimes too. Uh, but I don't know. I guess that in that place that I lived in rural Michigan, the thing that I saw that was nice about the religious part of people was that they were more communal and they looked out for each other. And like if your power went out, people would bring you stuff, that kind of thing. But then COVID hit and nobody gave a fuck about anybody anymore. 4 different times it was the worst county in the worst state in the worst country in the entire world, making it the worst place in the world for COVID 4 separate times because nobody gave a fuck. People went out knowing they had COVID, not wearing masks and spreading it to their overwhelmingly elderly population there. Um, so I guess when it comes to being in a pinch, these like, super religious people maybe didn't look out for each other the way you would expect them to.
it's it depends how we talk about looking out for people. Because again, there's a lot of things about Christians should act in a particular way. A story from sort of like they got handed down in our family. At least it was told to me by my mum, so it's one of those. It's probably one of those that's like a general known story, and then my mum told it to me. But um, there was a woman where we were in like Southern Ireland, where my family comes from, in the now Republic, because I have to say that every fucking time. Um, where she was fucking hungry. She had kids, and she went to the local parish for help. And she said, "Look, I can't feed my kids. I need some help. I need some charity." Because that's, you went to the parish because all these middle class women would be like, "Yes, we'll help you." And this middle class woman looked at her, wrote something down on a piece of paper, and handed it to her, and said, "There you go. That'll help you." And she opened the piece of paper, and it was a recipe for potato soup.
Ah.
And there's a lot of that. Like, a lot of people don't really want to embrace the idea. A lot of people want to talk the game of charity and being a good Christian, but I don't know how much they actually understand what that means. And to an extent, it's a difficult one to ask, especially when, like, what we're talking about with charity, and when we talk about meekness in Christianity, for example. It's like, well, suffering's seen as a bit of a good thing in some respects. It fortifies you. Catholic shame is like a pretty, like, you should be ashamed. You are a sinner. Would you say you kind of, like, because of your interactions with Christians, it's jaded you on kind of the way
Yes.
Christians behave?
People that call themselves Christians. I like real Christians. People that actually believe the stuff. They've read the book. They believe they have an understanding of it, and they try to do their best to abide by it. I like those people. I don't like people that call themselves Christians and act in a way that would make a priest skin crawl. And that's the majority of people that walk around calling themselves Christians today. So
Sure.
I'm really jaded against that, which has also really jaded me against like redneck people. That area has ruined me. I've said many times too, if I'm prejudiced against any group of people, it's hillbillies or rednecks, because I have seen more hatred under the guise of religion come out of that group of people than I've seen come out of anybody in my entire life. It's not even directed at me. I've seen it happen to other people, and it's just horrifying to me. People that are wholly convinced that they're right for no other reason, and they also believe that they're doing what God wants somehow.
Hey, thank you for the raid,
mix.
Sonsol. Appreciate that. Welcome, readers. We're talking about religion.
Just watch the number tick down.
Yeah, just like welcome, raiders. Everyone instantly leaves. I don't understand. Ooh, British. Oh, the religion stuff's fine, but the fact that I'm British is a problem. That's actually also fair.
That
I am a
makes sense.
redcoat. I am a redcoat. That is fair. Hope you had a good stream, Sansa. You good, buddy? Is this anti-theist stream? No. Well, it can be. If you want to ask anti-theist questions, we can do anti-theism.
Speaking of, somebody did have a question that I was
sure.
So this says, hey, I have a question from the gallery. I used to argue with a good Christian friend about the concept of being God-fearing. Can Beckett explain the concept from an American Protestant standpoint? Well, how about a British Christian standpoint?
God-fearing. When you say explain the concept of God-fearingness, okay. So there's a couple of ways you can look at this. Generally, the idea of God as kind of peaceful and merciful is fairly new. It generally comes around the period of Rousseau, because of Rousseau. So around like when Rousseau wrote about the noble savage, there was a large earthquake, and it destroyed a city. A lot of people died, and a lot of people said, "How can God let this happen?" And Rousseau's argument was, well, God didn't let this happen. We've done it to ourselves because we live in cities. That's not natural. If we were like the noble savage, we'd sleep under a tree, and then there'd be an earthquake or a lightning would strike and the tree would fall over, we'd find a new tree. And this kind of fundamentally changed the view of how, like, this was, like God was not wrathful, nature was good, humans fuck up. And it kind of changed that opinion within European stuff. But within, like, Protestantism, like Puritanism, God is something like Christ loves us and wants to save us, but God kind of still fucking hates us. and we're kind of fuck ups. So it's not that.
Yes.
I'm being hyperbolic, but we should be afraid of God. Like the argument is like when we talk about fear and awe, again we use modern interpretations of those words, but it's very much a case of like you look at it and you go, "Wow, this is an incredibly powerful thing. I should have fucking respect, reverence, and fear for it." In the same way, you should be like fearful of the king. You can love and serve the king, but this dude can have your head cut off. It is a powerful being, and fear is tied to respect. Now you can have like elements like Quakerism, for example, where you are literally like quaking in silence in the presence of God, because again, God is overwhelmingly a fundamental force. Are you all personally religious? I'm arguing these from a kind of Christian Catholic perspective. I believe in God. I'm not Christian or Catholic.
There's I don't actually know if he was a Quaker or not. Okay, he wasn't. Everybody's favorite founding father, Thomas Jefferson, captured the idea of fear of God pretty good. He said, "Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just." I think that a real Christian who
Shouldn't have
says,
betrayed the Queen
I fear God,
or King in that
means
case.
they fear the ramifications of their actions when they stand before God. That I fear God because I know that he is just, and I know that I am bad, and that I have to atone for the things that I've done. I think that's what that idea comes from, is that like I know the mistakes that I've made in the eyes of God, and I am terrified of the day that I have to stand judgment for them.
Well, we are fundamentally sinful, and that's kind of important. So let's take the gay marriage argument, because that's always a fun one. That's never contentious at all. The argument of churches should marry gay people because God loves everyone is a flawed scriptural argument. Once again, this is Total War Warhammer 3. I'm just playing it in the background very badly. So it's a fundamentally flawed one. If you are not having sex for procreation, it's a sin, even if you are married. So I know Anglican priests, for example, who won't marry barren couples. Or like, and if you like, when you like go to a priest to get married, you have a series of questions. It's like, are you going to have children? If they say no, well, you can't get married then, because even if you are married, sex is sinful. But the important thing about this is everything is fucking sinful. Anything that like takes your attention away from Christ is a sin. You should constantly be like thinking about God and repenting, because this is the most important thing. Your life should be dedicated to the service of Christ. Really? Yeah. Like again, you shouldn't be having sex for any fucking reason other than having kids. And even then, you shouldn't enjoy it.
And the reason it feels good is your gift for doing God's work. That's what an orgasm is. That's what I've been told by people in the church, is that the orgasm is basically your reward for attempting procreation, like God wants you to. It's the gift for couples to have. Yeah.
God wants you to do it. Sure. I don't hate it. Hey, thank you for the bits. That's very fucking cool.
So my vasectomy is really
hallelujah, finally someone is saying it. Look, everything's sinful. We are all sinners. That's kind of the point. And like again, this is the biggest argument against gay marriage. Why do you need to get married? Like again, like if marriage is a holy union for the purpose of bringing up children in a religious environment. Now, I think that you could have the argument. I think this is actually a sound theological argument of you could have two gay people get married, say, well, we're not having sex, but we need to be married because we're going to adopt a kid and we're going to bring them up in a Christian household. I actually think that is a really sound theological argument for gay marriage. But you'd have to be really fucking specific about it. I'm going to be honest with you. And it's again, it's very Christian. This is why priests, like Catholic priests in particular, don't have families, because you're celibate. You're not having sex with anyone. It's not because they're only going to fuck the choir boy. It's because they shouldn't be having fucking sex. So yeah, and you can kind of see that built into the religion. It's a wild turn. I mean, the Anglican Church is a fucking mess anyway. One of my mum's friends was struggling with her faith. My mum was quite religious, and not like insane, not like American quite religious. She was Catholic. We're an Irish Catholic family. You're Catholic, but one of her friends was Anglican, and she was struggling. And she went to a local priest, and she said, "I'm really struggling to believe at the moment. Nothing's happening. I'm just really struggling to believe." And the priest turned to her, laid his hand on her shoulder, and said, "Have you just tried harder? Can you give it a go?" And that's part of the problem. I mean, I think a lot of priests now don't seem to understand why they believe either. Not all, but it's a bit of a problem. I mean, America's a whole fucking mess. I think things like seed faith and mega churches horrify me.
Yeah. Do you think that's exactly what Jesus had in mind?
I think if Jesus came back, he wouldn't overturn things in the megachurch. He'd just be like, "Well, it was a waste of fucking time, wasn't it? Clearly, this was a waste of fucking time." Jesus, like, I think Christ would take his own name in vain. I think I think he'd walk in and be like, "Jesus Christ, no, shut up, seriously, oh my god, like, no, seriously, what the fuck have you done?" Like,
I always felt that way about stained glass growing up. I always thought that stained glass was like a slight against Jesus. It's unnecessary funds spent on the aesthetics of the church rather than providing for people.
Yeah, I suppose from the Catholic side, because again, Catholicism contains iconography for two reasons. Firstly, because it's when you've got a book in Latin originally, you need the way to like communicate things, and we're talking about a religion that grew out the pagan, kind of like the classical pagan period. So, like iconography and images are the easiest way to do that. Just quickly, okay, not to make any assumptions, but by any chance, would you describe yourself as a deist? I'd probably say I'm a deist.
You have to be.
Yeah, I think okay, so I'll say this. Like a lot when we get into sort of like deep philosophical conversations, people are like, "I describe myself as this." And as somebody with a degree in theology, I dislike doing that because of an experience I had during my degree where I really fucking hated Kant. Like I hated Kantian ethics. And we were going through Kantian ethics, and I was like, "Oh, I actually agree with quite a lot of universalizable maxims. Like, I don't lie very much. Like, I like everyone lies, but I try very hard not to lie. This isn't a moral thing either. This is largely grown out the fact that I'm a very bad liar. So I've sort of just had to learn to be honest because I lie so unconvincingly. It just doesn't fucking work for me. It's just a situation I'm in now, but." The stuff with Kant, I was like, "Oh, I agree with lots of this." And I was talking to one of my lecturers about it, and he was like, "Well, yeah, most people are multiple things. Most people have elements of utilitarianism to them. Most people have elements of Kantian. Very few people are completely purist." So it's made me more careful about labels, I suppose. I'd say, look, I believe in God. I have beliefs around that. I've had what I would describe as religious experiences. No, like miraculous stuff. We went over this with Drowsy earlier, but like I've had those experiences. They push me in a direction to believe. I constantly question. I suppose I think that's healthy.
Yes.
But yeah, as far as I can tell, I'm fairly certain there's a God. I'd stake my immortal soul on it. There we go.
It's funny that you said what you said because I am, I wouldn't say holy, but I'm fairly Kantian. That's where I get the foundation of my moral system comes from Kant.
I pick the philosophy that helps me win the current debate. Based, absolutely fucking based. That is the best use for philosophy. Anybody who sits there and tells you that philosophy is like a model under which you can like interact with the world and you need to have absolutes and things, bollocks. It's all about winning debates. Hegel was a fucking like Hegel wrote his theories, which by the way are pretty fucking simple in the most complex way ever. so that most people, like, literally, there are academics at the time around Hegel writing who are critics of Hegel who are like, I don't think Hegel's that smart. I think he just writes in a really fucking convoluted way to make people think he's smart. That is the core of philosophy, okay? Don't get taken in by the philosophy bros who are like, this makes me smarter. The fact that anybody has done a degree in philosophy or theology, including me, and thought that that was a good, productive idea, proves that they are dumber than you, okay? Like, it proves that they do not make good life decisions. I am like, don't look at me and be like, oh, he seems to have done well. He works in STEM. That's survivor's bias. I was lucky, okay? I was lucky.
What do you get? I agree with you that Kant is perhaps the worst author that has ever lived, ever, that actually got published. But I think
Kant is really fucking hard to read.
He's hard to listen to on audiobook. In the introduction, I listened to 2 hours of him attempting to justify something he hadn't told me what it was yet.
Yeah,
I shit you not.
I can't confirm this, but I hear that Kant is better in German. I have no reason to disbelieve this.
Ought to be.
So yeah, I'll go for that. But yeah, fuck it. We've got so derailed. God, fuck. Some of the raiders stuck around. I'm impressed with all of you. Well done. I'm impressed with any of you that stayed for 5 minutes, to be honest. Did we have another question? Did we have anything? I could tell the truth. Fuck. That's gonna kill me.
Maybe I don't know. To be honest, I tried my best to not look at my chat throughout the conversation because
if anyone, okay, I'll say this: if anyone in my chat has questions, if anyone in your chat has questions, I think we've been going for
over
like
2 hours.
Over 2 hours. Okay, I think we're at the point where we can probably just get questions if people want questions. Beckett, do you know mostly Christian theology from your degree, or do you learn in Jewish or Muslim theology? I'm all right on Jewish, and I say all right, like probably better than the average person. Islam, I'm pretty good on some of the more esoteric parts, and things around kind of their mythology and jinn. I'm missing some fundamental things. I have read the Quran, but how much I can actually remember of the Quran after like 7 years is highly fucking debatable. And generally, yeah, I've got a very, very good working knowledge of Christianity. But my actual focus of my dissertation was demonology and paganism. And its interactions with Christianity. Kind of like, so I wrote about how basically demonology evolved from kind of like maybe like 200 BCE to the modern era, largely talking about things like the Picatrix and the evolution of like kind of Jewish demons, things like Azazel, and what happened with him, into kind of the works of people like Crowley. And modern occultists, which I just found really interesting. Is your opinion? Do you think Jews know more of the Hebrew Bible than at least American Christians? Yeah, sure. I think that's probably fair. I'd probably go for that. There's always things that are lost in translation. Lost may be the wrong word, but yeah, reading translations of the Quran is very difficult to get the picture of what the words are actually intended as. That is very fucking true, and I made that point about translating the Bible into English. It is true. So yes, I've read the Quran. Whether I would not describe myself as an Islamic expert by any fucking degree, though.
Do you know anything about like LaVeyan Satanism? That was probably the religion I subscribed to the longest.
LaVeyan Satanism. I have read LaVey's Satanic Bible. I know quite a lot about LaVey. I like LaVey, and I do like LaVeyan Satanism.
Me too.
I think so LaVey was a massive fucking troll. Don't like the Satanic Bible is fantastic. He does things like he's like, so anybody who comes and tells you about a religion or a god, you are worshipping that person by proxy. They've just come to you and told you about fucking Thunderbolt. You don't know, and then you're giving them your power. And then later on, he's like, by the way, here's a way to give yourself power. Listen to me. And it's this wonderful juxtaposition. But like LaVey's history, like a lot of people read him as like, yes, he was deep into the occult. LaVey went around America and everywhere else, basically writing about occults, occult groups and seances and charlatans, and pointing out that they were fucking charlatans. He met Crowley's group, and he was like, "These are some of like I'm paraphrasing, but he's like, Crowleyites are some of the dumbest virgins in robes I've ever met. Like, what's fucking wrong with these people?" So Crowley, yeah, and I think Crowley's I think LaVey's daughter said years later, yeah, he was a troll. He wasn't like into the occult. He liked disproving the occult. But yeah, I've got a lot of time for LaVey and the Satanic Bible, and if you want that whole kind of like self-empowerment thing, the proxy is the self kind of message, I think there's a lot of time for it. I do, however, find the Satanic Church incredibly fucking cringe. And I'm going to go on a really weird tangent here. I know this is just me fucking rambling, but hear me out. So, the worship of Baphomet, and when people talk about Baphomet, is one of the most fundamentally frustrating things when you know the history of Baphomet. So, Baphomet, the word Baphomet, means Muhammad. It is a Muslim word. It is a regional Muslim word for Muhammad. Very specifically, the reason that word got used and associated with demonology or Satan is because it's the name that was used as a claim that the Crusaders were using or worshipping when the Crusaders were like inquisitioned. And the reason the Crusaders were inquisitioned is because the French king offered owed an awful lot of fucking money to them and was like, isn't it just easier if you didn't exist anymore? So when people talk about Baphomet and things, it's like Baphomet is not some ancient fucking demon. Baphomet just means fucking Muhammad, and it's very, very, very annoying. And I've been annoyed about this for years.
You don't
but
think that it's part of the mockery when it comes to like its association with Satanism?
I don't. I think if you wanted to make the argument that it's part of the mockery, it would be more stomachable. But that's not how most people, because that's not how it's used.
Correct.
And it's not why it was selected. That's one of those things where we retcon stuff and go, that's the reason we chose it. We didn't. Like, the reason Baphomet gets used is because of its association with Satan and like the Crusaders, because there are plenty of people within Satanism, not all, because Satanism is essentially religiousized atheism. But there are plenty of people within Satanism who do the occult stuff.
It's dogmatic humanism, is what it is.
Sure, I'll go for dogmatic humanism. That's fine.
I was a Satanist longer than I was anything else. And have you ever read any of his other like Satan Speaks? It was a collection of articles that he wrote. It was the last publication before he died.
Maybe. I'm aware of them. I can't remember if I've read them.
It's really, really good. One of them is called like Why I Don't Walk Anymore. Basically, he's seen somebody who's getting pushed around in a wheelchair. Then he's seen the person get up and start doing stuff. He's like, why are you in a wheelchair? He goes, well, why would I walk? He goes, some people just do things for me all the time. It's because they see the chair. And he was like, you're a fucking genius. I should never walk anymore. Oh my God.
Give me just 1 second. I've got some bits. Thank you for the bits. I will offer that. Give me 1 second. Very, very quickly on for Theosophy. I have read a little bit, but not much. I don't know. If I looked more into it, I might remember more. But I'll have a quick Google and just see if I can jog my memory. But Matt, do you have a few favorite verses that help you? Maybe some thoughts on a specific one and what it means to you. And thank you very much for the bits. So I really like the story of Job for a couple of reasons. I really like the messaging of Job, generally speaking. I also really find the interactions between God and Satan really fascinating in Job. Because the argument of Satan being the adversary can very well be made that Satan isn't the adversary of God. Satan is the adversary of humans. He serves a function and a purpose. And he seems to do that in the story of Job, because like the conversation with God and Satan is almost convivial. It's like, well, okay, you go do that thing and prove to me that you're right. And when, Jesus is tempted, Satan listens to him. Like, get behind me, Satan, is you will listen. I think that's a really interesting interaction, but I really like Job. I obviously like Revelations. I
It's the
looked and
best
beheld
book.
a pale horse. Well, it is. Everyone liked Revelations, but I looked and I beheld a pale horse, and the name that sat upon him was Death is just like stuck in my fucking head. I really like the story of Legion. These are all vaguely demonic, unsurprisingly. I really like the story of Legion in the Bible. I'm terrible with like name with book and verse, but I could drag it up if it's matters. But it's interesting because it's a story of essentially Jesus showing mercy not just to the man he exorcises the demon from, but to the demon. Legion's like, please don't send me back to hell, and Christ is like, yeah, all right, go into the pigs. It's kind of an interesting interaction in that respect. I think a lot of Old Testament stuff is really good as well. So like I like the story of Samson. I think that's an interesting one about trust and about trusting God. But there are lots of like general religious phrases as well that I think are interesting. So like for instance, everyone's heard blood is thicker than water. And then they go like, family's more important than friends. That's how it's read, but that's not what the original phrase is. The original phrase is the water of the womb is thicker than, is the water of the sorry, the blood of the oh fuck, the blood of Christ is thicker than the water of the womb, I think is what it is. Or the blood, no, blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. There we go. Which is basically it's got its origins in religious kind of the idea of like your religion comes first over kind of your familial bonds. But the reason it was actually popularized was military service. It was the argument that people who've been to war with you are going to be able to understand far better your experience of being in war, and those bonds that are made in it, than the civilians back home. And it was popularized in the 17 and 1800s. Give me 2 seconds. I've got a few more. Fuck, sorry, Drazi.
Somebody had a question for you on my side too when you get there.
Sure. Pandora, I can see your two as well, but I will come back to you. Go ahead, Drazi.
Can Beckett by chance explain? I'm just gonna read it the way it's supposed to be said. Can you explain why God making a bet with Satan about Job is within God's character? It seems like a better teaching story than like an accurate telling of like how God would behave.
Again, I think it's because when I read that story, going back to the idea that Satan is the adversary of man, he's serving a purpose. God within the Old Testament is
he's mean.
Suffers is the wrong word, but in some respects is a lot more human than God in the New Testament. He's a lot more connected and readable. There's a wonderful thing in kind of Judaism, which is there's a wonderful Jewish phrase that I like, that if you get two rabbis in a room, you'll have three opinions. And there's an argument there that like rabbis are able to actually directly argue with a god and be like, what the fuck are you doing? What is this? Why did you make this decision? In a way that you can't in Christianity. And I think that when you're looking at the story of Job, it's Satan almost fulfilling that role of God going, Job's fucking great, and Satan's being like, dude, are you sure? Because like he's got every reason to be fucking great, and God being like, okay, fine, prove your point, because I'm right, but your job is the adversary of man, and if you think I'm wrong, prove me wrong. And then God isn't wrong, God is correct. And that's kind of the point. So it's the relationship God has to angels within the Old Testament is also pretty humanizing. There's a lot of additional mythology around that. People like Raphael, bearer of the book. There are two readings of Rahab as well. Rahab gets read a lot as kind of a woman tied to water. But there's another story of Rahab, which is Rahab as a water angel. and Rahab was the angel of the oceans. I found this in a book fucking years ago, and I've never been able to find another source for it. But I was really into because of Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver. I was really into like the names because like Malchiah, Duma, Raziel, Raphael are all names taken from Hebrew mythology. But anyway, Rahab basically was angels of the sea, the angel of the sea, and around the creation of everything, God is like, okay, you're in charge of the seas. That's fucking great. I'd like to separate these seas out now. And Rahab was like, no. And God was like, Rahab, separate the seas out. Separate them. He was like, no. I've got one big fucking ocean here. This is great. It's fucking huge. And God was like, okay, fine. Fuck you. Kills Rahab, does it himself. And then at one point, the book of the word gets lost in the ocean. So God resurrects Rahab, says, Rahab, go and get the book. And Rahab's like, are you fucking kidding me? You murdered me because I wouldn't do what you say. And now you've resurrected me to go and get a fucking book? No! Do it yourself. So God kills him again and gets the book himself. And there's stuff like that in ancient mythology that I really fucking like. But it is this kind of like convivial relationship that you get between God and the angels, which kind of makes sense for the fall later on.
That's pretty fun.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite stories. I really like so in Jewish mythology, like the actual devil is Azazel. And Azazel's buried under the desert. He's dead. Kind of. And the reason you get scapegoating is because like when you like came to sacrifice a goat, you'd have two goats, not one. And you release one goat into the desert for Azazel to basically placate Azazel. But Azazel, I've always got this image of Azazel's death, which is just Raphael, bearer of the book for some reason, is the one who kills Azazel. And I've just got images of a dude clinging to a book as he sort of dive bombs into a massive demon's head and like takes it out. But yeah, that's why the desert's a desert in like it's because it's got a fucking huge demon under it. And then Azazel's evolution is really interesting because a Polish theologian wrote about it. I'll try and find the book. I think I've got the audiobook version, but he's good. But he basically tracks the evolution of Azazel, and Azazel goes from sort of like big bad to Watcher in the Noah's Ark story. And for those who don't know, Watchers are angels who didn't fall, but they didn't pick a side, so they end up on Earth. And around the Ark story is kind of their redemption. And Azazel ends up as a Watcher. And then over time, the Watchers are sort of phased out of Christianity completely. So Azazel gets phased out. But that's why Azazel kind of just vanishes from kind of the Abrahamic faith over about a 1300-year period, I suppose. Watchers sound cool. I like Watchers. Sorry, that was long. You were like, I've got a question. I'm like, here's a massive tangent about demons. Give me a second. Right. Pandora. That is more like the Jewish view of Satan, that God works with God. Yeah. I'm also curious if there have been Christian sects that accept traditional Jewish concepts like the Orator and Talmud. I'm not sure. I can't think of any. But that doesn't mean that there aren't. And Christianity is incredibly varied. I've spoken to Andrew Wilson about this of the Crucible because he fundamentally disagrees that we live in a fallen state. He's like, yeah, no, that's dumb. Like the life isn't about suffering; it's about being happy and having sex and beautiful women and drinking. I'm like, what fucking religion is orthodoxy? What is going on over there? This shit is why we had a schism. Are you kidding me? How do you feel about Satanism being? How do you feel about Satan in Islam being a jinn, ibis, and the difference in character there? Yes, So, for those who don't know, I date Stardust, and Stardust comes from a Muslim family, and I brought this up, and I was like, yeah, in Islam, Satan isn't even an angel, because angels don't have free will. He's a jinn. She was like, no, he's not. And then she checked him, and was like, yeah, it is. What the fuck? And I'm like, the reason I found this really weird is in the Quran, God takes Adam and Eve up to heaven, and all the angels go, oh God, you're so clever. It's so good. These humans are so wonderful. And Ibis, for no apparent fucking reason, is sat there and is like, Well, I'm not impressed. It's like, what the fuck are you doing there? Why are you there? Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting read. I think it makes sense of the way Islam sort of took Aristotelian philosophy in the same way that Christianity took Plato's philosophy. So this is one of the reasons that there's a big difference in ethics in Islam versus Christianity. Because Christianity is very black and white. There are good things, there are bad things. And that's because Plato is very black and white. There are good things and there are bad things. And in Islam, it's much more variable. You can actually be too good. You can do bad things for good reasons. There's a lot of variation there. And that's because it's based off Aristotle. And interestingly, because of that association, Aristotle was banned in like Europe for like centuries. It's fucking wild. It was seen as like a heretical text.
I think Islam's strongest thing that it has going for it is if you go to hell, you probably don't go forever, as opposed to Christianity where you just go to hell forever. I think that's its biggest sell.
It's very final, isn't it? But yeah, it feels very final. I don't know. I think this is why Catholicism has the answer of purgatory. Catholicism's like, yeah, you're kind of gonna go to purgatory. You'll be there for a while, cleansing of sins. I mean, again, like, has anyone like, I don't know why I'm saying this.
The Catholic Church got rid of purgatory.
I know limbo got like completely removed.
I'm sorry. Is there a difference? I never understood
between limbo and purgatory.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a massive. So limbo was abolished in 2005, but they're not the same thing. So limbo is where unbaptized babies go, and the unbaptized go. If you have no sin. And it's essentially godless. Purgatory is multiple levels of basically redeeming yourself. So in the same way that there are 7 levels of hell, there are 7 levels of purgatory. And Dante's Inferno, for example, is like when you read Dante's Inferno, it's like you go through the multiple layers, but you also go through the layers of purgatory where people are redeemed for their sins. That's the point. And this is also why you have saints, and why in your confirmation you are confirmed under the name. So I was actually like, my confirmation guardian, if you like, was Raphael, the angel. But mostly you choose a saint or a martyr because they're the person who's going to help you get into heaven. They're like your part of your redemption path. Well, I mean, not necessarily guardian angel, but guardian being, because again.
Well, that's yeah. Somebody asked if you can explain biblically accurate angels. I don't even know what that means to explain them.
I absolutely can.
Enlighten me. I don't even know what that question means.
So, angels are not just like, oh, you look like a human and you've got some wings. Biblically accurate angels are horrifying. The reason, like, yeah, so the reason that, like, when the shepherds and everyone else, when they're told about Jesus's birth, the angels are like, be not afraid. It's quite literally like, I know I'm a giant ring of like burning eyeballs, but like chill out for 5 seconds. This is fine. So yes, I can. Again, deific beings, like in kind of ancient mythology, don't have to look like us. And generally they're highly symbolic. So for instance, I've forgotten the fucking categories, forgive me, but like for instance, you have one that is just like a load of rings with eyeballs on them surrounded by wings. And these are highly symbolic of both divinity, but the fact that they're all watching, all seeing. And they are, divine, weird creatures.
We're used to
there's no reason they should look like that. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the categories. I'd have to go and Google it. I mean, I can Google
cherubs,
it, but like
seraphim, and that's all I know off the top of my head.
So cherubs aren't small little cute things. They are something else. That's actually there's another name for them. Yeah, I mean, fuck. I've actually got like in my community, Ties and Wine, like ages ago was like, can you please here are 10 subs, please do a video on occultism. Or something. So maybe I'll do that at some point. I'll do a stream on it and I'll let you know. But yeah, I'd have to dig into it because I don't want to give terrible information.
That'd be a really cool show.
Cherubs are so scary. Yeah, like, yeah, I'd be happy to go through things. Like, biblically accurate angels are fucking amazing. Fucking chef's kiss.
They're my second favorite creature in the Bible. My favorite is the locust that Abaddon brings in the Book of Revelations that have the face of a women and teeth of a lion and scorpion tails, and that you'll kill yourself if you see them because you're so scared. That's a creature.
There's a wonderful theory that Revelations is basically the description.
Book?
Well, no, it's well. I mean, that's the general read. So the general read is like the reason, like the number of the beast. The number of the beast is zero. Is Nero's number. It's written around the fall of Jerusalem, so it's a story way to tell basically the horrific way Rome is destroyed Jerusalem, because the like Jews were sundered from Jerusalem. It's fucking ridiculous. So that kind of makes sense. But there's like a conspiracy theory read that when he was describing like the Locust, for example, he was describing advanced attack helicopters. Because he was like viewing the future. So what he was seeing, like all the shit in it is like some like advanced technology that he didn't know how to make sense of, which I think is really funny.
That is really funny. The Book of Revelation is pretty funny on its own. With like just so wild. It's like I don't know. I read the entire Left Behind series just so I could get to the part where I seen the locusts and Abaddon rip open the earth. That's like a 20-book series. It's like book 17. So I was like, at that point, I might as well finish it.
Hold on, I'm just bringing up Book of Revelation because like I feel like it's one of those books you can basically turn to most pages in and find something fucking bizarre. Okay, let's go for book 12. Why are there so many ads? Yeah, that's true. There are so many ads on this Bible website. You're a Bible website. You're doing God's work. Stop giving me ads. Fuck off. Right,
that's
the woman
and
the dragon.
Christian thing I've ever heard. Are you kidding me?
Save your immortal soul. Drink Coca-Cola. Actually, complete tangent. Apparently, there's an advertising company that wants to write adverts in the sky. So when you look up in the night, you don't see stars, you see adverts. And that says something about us. If we have the technology to write signs in the sky that everyone can see, not love each other, not be kind, not give to charity, drink fucking Coca-Cola. Do you know what? If that goes through, that's the point where I think, like, violent revolution needs to happen. Because, like, there's clearly something fucking fundamentally wrong with us. The Woman and the Dragon. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to earth. See, that sounds like nuclear bombs to me. That's what that sounds like to me. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth. Could be the Statue of Liberty, we don't know, so that it might devour her child, America, the moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male, Donald Trump, who will rule all nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and his throne. The woman fled into the world. This is so heretical. A woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. Like, fucking hell. Well, she'd have to now. They've banned abortion in Florida. Sorry, I feel bad for that one. Right. Yeah, like so much of this can be read in so many fucking weird ways. But the thing with the Revelations that I find really interesting, has anyone read the Book of Law by Crowley?
Almost certainly, like over 15 years ago.
Yeah. So the Book of Law's fucking wild. I mean, it was written in 3 days while he was high out of his mind. But it's stuff like oh, the best blood is the blood of the moon, then of the virgin, then of the lamb, and it's stuff like that all the way through. And you read Revelations, and you're like, yeah, this just reads like occult books. I'm a bit confused as to what 7 mountains Christian denominations is. I've heard the term, but I don't know what it is specifically. I don't know. I will
You just said
Google it.
something I'd really like to point out. Have you ever been to a? You must have been to a Catholic wedding, yeah?
Yeah.
Imagine if everybody who was at the Catholic wedding was dressed in black, and the words that were being spoken, you couldn't understand them. You could paint that as a devil worshipping ceremony
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
fucking easily. I was at my first one ever, and I was freaked the fuck out by just like how much ritual and just how in sync everybody was. It was really, really creepy. Probably the creepiest thing I've ever experienced in my life is a Catholic wedding.
So one of the things I did when my mum died, I needed to organize the funeral and everything else, and I went to some expense to make sure that I had a Latin mass. A, because mum was Catholic, but B, because most of mum's friends were atheists. They're all like authors and things. So I managed to get a load of atheists in a church to a Latin mass, and I think my mum would have found that fucking hilarious. Like, the Seven Mountain Mandate is the denominist quest to bring about Armageddon. How have I not heard of this? Thank you, Viv. Good evening, by the way. I said Seven Mountain. Oh, okay. Denominanism. Yeah. You'll have to forgive me. It's late, and I'm very dyslexic. Can we talk about how much cooler black folk church is versus white folk church? I will say this: like, look, I've been to my friend's wedding. Actually, was one of the most profound experiences I've had in this. I've been to churches and then just been like, oh, like it feels really empty. Like I've been to churches that just feel like empty boxes, and I think that's like the most depressed I am about when I get depressed about Christianity. I'm like, this feels like an empty fucking box to me. White people just don't season their religion.
I was gonna say black people are just like cooler in general, so it's gonna bleed into the church.
I'd love to go to a Russian Orthodox baptism. I'd love to go to Russian Orthodox church because I've never been. That sounds really interesting.
What's the Russians' flavor of church? I have no idea.
Okay, so Russia is an Orthodox country, which already makes it slightly crazy, but they still have exorcists and stuff. So that's pretty standard things. So yeah, they have to take over society divided into 7 sectors like family, media, government, then use that power to bring about the end times. That's fucking wild, Viv. Fuck. Okay, I'll have to go and have a look into it. I'm familiar with like so there's people who like want to jumpstart the apocalypse, and one of the parts of that is like rebuilding the temple. So there are flat pack versions of the temple ready to be flown to Jerusalem to rebuild it to kickstart the apocalypse. How fucking crazy is that? Just like, yeah, the minute Israel like fully takes over, gonna go and like build the temple and kickstart kickstart the apocalypse. Fucking lunatics.
That just tells me that nobody who wasn't a part of it stopped and said like, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" Because if they had to say the words to another human being, they'd stop and realize they're fucking insane.
I want to rebuild the temple, but I'm Orthodox Jewish. I want to bring in Messiah, not Apocalypse. I'm not Christian. I think it's interesting. Can I ask a question, Pandora? If you're Orthodox Christian, if Christ returned and said, "I'm Christ," and then fulfilled the remaining requirements of the Messiah prophecy, would you accept Christ as the Messiah? I'm just interested. Ted Cruz's dad is 7 months. Jesus, that's a little worrying.
He should have been worried as soon as he heard Ted Cruz. He was just late on the worry. That's all.
I don't know. I found it harder to hate Ted Cruz since he grew a beard.
I didn't say hate him.
It's just a very it's a very alluring beard. Okay, that's a beard you can trust. No, I'm kidding. I don't mean that. That's not a real endorsement of Ted Cruz. On a scale of 1 to 10, how cool do you think Jesus is? And thank you for the bits. I really like Jesus, actually. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I know it's like fashionable to hate. Oh, thank you, Parallax. Based Raiders, welcome. I really like Jesus. I think Jesus had a lot of cool messages. I think the story of Christ is actually really interesting. It gets kind of dumbed down in some respects, but I think it's interesting. Like things like being like, oh yeah, no, fuck this fig tree. And also the human elements of Christ are really fucking like interesting. The fact that Christ can be tempted at all is kind of fascinating. And the fact that, you know, elements of kind of, what's a good way to put it, knowing that you're heading to your death as your purpose is a really fucking interesting framing. I will say this. I mean, I think it's really interesting when you look at writings like "Give unto Caesar," "Render unto Caesar," and you read that, and you're like, "Well, that's a really interesting thing for Christ to say." It's almost like that was written in because the Romans wanted Christians to pay taxes. That's an interesting one.
Wait a minute. They asked, "How cool do you think he is?" And the first words out of your mouth isn't, "This man can turn water into wine and walk on water." He is like the king of the best party tricks ever. He is the coolest. If Jesus shows up at your party, everybody's talking about it forever, even if they don't know he's the Son of God. He is cool as shit.
Okay.
And he's humble.
Enough.
He's not even going to brag about it. Top tier cool guy.
Yeah, no, that is fair. That is fair.
Sorry, I had to.
Are you willing to go into the fig tree thing? Maybe. I'd have to go and Google it, but I can do. And again, thank you for the bits. Very, very based. If Jesus fulfilled the requirements of the Messiah, then maybe, but I don't think that would happen. No, that's fair enough. I'm just interested. Where are we? Fig tree thing. Let me Google. Hold on. So I want to go right.
While you're Googling, I just gotta ask you, have you ever read the Albigen Papers?
That rings a bell. I don't know. You have to tell me what they are.
Richard Rose was just like a guy, and he decided to go into priesthood because he wanted to understand God better. And then he realized that the priests don't know God any better than he did. So he just sort of went on like a spiritual journey to try to figure out what God is and isn't, and sort of find his place in the universe in relation to God. And it's a really, really fascinating set of papers. And the weirdest thing about it to me is it was given to me by a guy who was hospitalized for thinking that he was Jesus. But everything else about this guy was totally normal. And in that book, there is a guy who thinks that he's Jesus that the author met, but was totally rational otherwise. I talked to the guy's mom, and he's trying to get his mom to back him up about his Jesusness. And she just so sadly he's like, "Mom, tell him about how I wrote my name when I was a baby." She's like, "No, honey, that didn't happen." He's like, "Mom, come on." Like she's running cover for like the doctors or something. But he gave me that book. And when I got to that part of the book, I was like, what? But super good book.
Okay. Let me. Fuck. I haven't read that. That sounds really interesting. But okay, let me go into the fig tree thing. So I'm just gonna straight up I've got the Bible verse. It's from Mark 11, 12 to 25. Jesus curses the fig tree and clears the temple courts. The next day, as he was leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard him say it. I just think like it's just such a weird thing to include. It's so. I can't see why it's there, because it's so bizarrely like, it's like, hey, do you remember that time Jesus was like, "Fuck that fig tree"? Like, he's fed multiple people, he's turned water into wine, but a fig tree's just pissed him off. It's just really, it's really odd and really interesting, and I absolutely fucking love it. And I've never spoken to a priest about it, and I've never gone in depth into it. But yeah, there's something about it that's just very, very human. Like joking aside,
weird. They pick weird stuff and they leave out weird stuff.
Thank you for the bits. Am I willing to investigate further? Yeah, dude, absolutely. Like, fuck it. What I'll do, Matt, is let's go through a couple more questions, and then at the end of this, I will dive into the meaning of Jesus cursing a fig tree. Cool explanation. Oh, in cursing the fig tree, he shows his justice on the sinners who bring forth not the expected fruits of grace. Since even though a person should only accept fruit from a tree in season, God, by contrast, always has the right to expect from us the fruits of righteousness and piety. Oh, so the fact that the fig tree just didn't give Jesus fruit means that he's cursed? Interesting. Lisa's like, cope. Fuck, that's really interesting. Okay, now, fig tree was a common symbol for Israel and may also have that meaning in here. The tree in the parable may refer to the Christian who has heard the gospel of Christ by faith into salvation. In either case, the parable reflects Jesus offering a chance for repentance and forgiveness of sin, showing his grace towards his believers. These 3 years logically refer to the period of Jesus' ministry, or simply this is the period it took for the tree to bear fruit. The fig tree, Gentile, was given the opportunity to be in the vineyard where it otherwise should not have been, as well as the needed time to bear fruit. The vine dresser, who is Jesus, does not fail and has offered to cultivate it, and so it will produce fruit. Interesting. Yeah, like, I really liked Eldrazi. Beckett, can we talk about religion? Yeah, sure. Give me just like 10 minutes to go on a fucking wild tangent about a fig tree. That's yeah, fuck. I will look into this. Why? I like the way that I'd like all the articles like I've got coming up on this are like straight up like, why did he do this? Like, of all the things Jesus has done, why did he curse a fig tree? Okay. Jesus and his disciples, on returning to Jerusalem from Bethany again, passed the fig tree. It was totally destroyed, withered from the roots. Jesus had predicted that no one would ever eat fruit from it again. And Peter, remembering what Jesus had said, called his attention to the withered tree. Jesus does not explicitly interpret the event, yet the meaning seems clear. Jesus predicted judgment on the temple who came to pass. Jesus predicted judgment on the temple will come to pass, as surely did his prediction that the fig tree would wither. Interesting. Oh, fuck, there is so much more to the fig tree. Okay. There we go. That is fig tree stuff. Sorry, wild fucking tangent, but, like, that's really interesting. And again, there's so much stuff in the Bible like this that I think it's really easy when people say things like, oh, the Bible's full of contradictions. And then you read it and you're like, or you go into the things that people point out as contradictions, you're like, well, they're not really contradictions. They're like down to certain interpretations. One of the things that's important to remember about scripture as well, at least if you're Catholic, or most denominations, is we talk about allegorical truth. And again, this comes from Augustine. So it's, you have the truth of the scriptural truth, this literally happened, but you also have the allegorical truth. Everything has sort of a secondary meaning to it that's trying to impart a lesson onto you, which I think is important. But thank you, Matt. If you want me to go in further, just say, because I will, because there is quite a lot to go through it. And it's actually kind of interesting. I've never looked in detail at this particular story. Anyway, you good, Drowsy? Have I driven you insane? I think I've driven everyone insane. I went on a tangent about big trees. I'm sorry.
No, you're. I've enjoyed this a lot. Really interested in your. You said you're gonna make a video about the occult, yeah?
Yeah, I was gonna do a stream, but I might as well just do it as a video. I'm doing more video essays now. I will get around to that. It can go on the pile. It's a nice. No, I want more. But yeah, like it can go on the pile. I think I'd be interested in doing that.
I look forward to it. Yeah. It's kind of late. I don't even know if my wife's still up, but if she is, if she's sleeping,
You're
I'm
in
still gonna
trouble?
wake her. No, if she's sleeping, I'm gonna wake her and be like, "Hey, spend time with me. I miss you."
Oh, okay. Well, look, I'll let you go spend time with your wife. I will sit here and continue answering questions for anyone who has questions. Apparently, this is what we're doing now. I think this might be the most engaged I've ever seen anybody in a stream about religion, but that's absolutely fine. I'm enjoying this immensely, and I appreciate the tangents. Welcome to my stream. It's all fucking tangents. That's all I do here. But sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll let you go. Thank you very much. And we'll chat again soon.
Again. This has been great for me. Like I said, I never get to talk to anybody about this.
Yeah. No, it's really fun. Well, we'll do it again. Like, I'm happy to keep doing stuff like this. That's fine. It doesn't have to be a one and done thing then. But yeah. All right. Cool. I will leave you to it. Have a lovely evening, Drowsy. Let's, buddy.